For those of you who are way too busy to watch all 134 episodes of Shameless, here's what happened, you lazy piece of shit.
If I'm gonna embarrass myself, I might as well do it right.
Wow, you just had the type.
Just knowing your tents are trying to kill you, that's gotta suck.
Here, it's coming through.
Great. Now get set.
Oh, no.
Hey,
Oh,
Karen,
we got you.
nice tie. What size are you?
Ah yes, the day has finally come where I sit down and chat with you guys about a particular TV show that I might be mildly obsessed with. This video series is going to be 3 parts. I was originally going to do 1 season per video, but seeing as that's just a lot of work, I decided to take them in chunks. This video will be focused on the first 3 seasons of the show. Also, before I really get going, I would really appreciate it if you guys could drop a like down below, comment what your favorite aspect of this show is, because I worked so ridiculously hard on this video. You guys don't even know. I originally wrote a script, okay? I filmed it. I edited most of it. Everything was completely done and I hated it. So I reworked the entire thing. Yes, I did. This is the culmination of 2.5 to 3 months of work. That makes this video the one that I've spent the most time on, which is not a shocker since we're going to be talking about 3 separate seasons of television in it. If you've seen the first 2 episodes of my Once Upon a Time recap, this video is going to be similar to that. In that series, I use a lot of videos from the show. It is quite hard to get past copyright when I do it that way, so I'm going to be using a little bit less with this video series, and it's also going to be less scripted. Like, I'm literally just going to be recapping the events in a more scripted way than I normally do when I do the recaps versus the analysis videos on Once Upon a Time. Because Once Upon a Time, I usually jump really far into the character motivations and the story beats and the plot lines and why everything's happening, whereas in like The 100 and American Horror Story and American Horror Stories, I'm really just recapping, saying this thing happened, this thing happened, this thing happened. This video is going to be kind of a mixture of the two. It's going to have the analysis elements of Once Upon a Time, but the recap elements of The 100 and American Horror Story. The first episode of Shameless was released January 9th, 2011. And while we're speaking on that specific year, I would like to point out that a handful of amazing television shows got their start in that year. American Horror Story, Once Upon a Time, Shameless, Black Mirror, Dance Moms, and I haven't seen the show, but Game of Thrones, all got their start in 2011. What was in the air? There's just so many iconic television shows that I grew up watching that came from that specific year. Shameless is actually a remake of the 2004 British series of the same name. Most of the first season follows a very similar trajectory, just with 5 extra episodes added throughout to double the length for the standard American television season. Both pilots are actually very similar to each other, and I haven't actually seen the rest of the British series, just the pilot, and from what I can tell, the episodes are quite literally identical. Most of the dialogue and character traits remain the same from the British version, but the style of humor is also wildly different. Early 2000s British humor is very hard to pass off as authentic in 2010's Chicago, so a lot of the jokes are changed or tweaked in the American version to fit the setting better. Watching the first episode of the British series was kind of like a culture shock for me because I've seen the US pilot countless times, but I've never seen the British one, so I knew what was going to happen, I just didn't know how it would be presented, which made for a very interesting watch. It's also a little hard for me to understand them, even with subtitles, because their accents are so thick and I'm just not used to hearing it. Maybe someday I'll make a comparison video of the 2 shows, but for right now I'm just going to focus on the American version that I grew up with. The American reboot was actually developed as early as January 2009 at HBO, but by fall 2009, it had been moved to Showtime. Basically, the show's pilot was done a whole year in advance, minus the Sheila scenes, which had to be reshot because the original actress Allison Janney left the show and was quickly replaced with Joan Cusack in August of 2010. Sometime in April that year, the show had officially been ordered for 12 episodes, which means they would go back into production that fall. The first episode finally came to the small screen on January 9th, 2011. Shameless is genuinely the second biggest show that Showtime has ever had, next to Dexter, of course. It also is the longest running show in Showtime history, surpassing Dexter by 2 entire seasons. A total of 134 episodes aired from January 9th, 2011 to April 11th, 2021. Shameless also had a very consistent audience of 1 million live viewers every single week. These 1 million viewers would literally tune in for 9 seasons, with some rocky periods here or there, but For a very consistent 9 years, it stayed exactly the same, and that is very commendable. That is very hard to do for a television show, especially one on Showtime, which is a small network. Despite the loss in viewership, Shameless is consistently ranked amongst the most popular shows to binge watch in the United States. At the end of the day, Shameless was a massive show that brought people of all groups together in its own special fucked up fashion. Growing up, I always felt a huge connection to the Gallaghers because they're just a more fucked up version of my family. At least that's how it felt to a child of divorce with a whole gaggle of rambunctious siblings. I won't lie and say it was exactly the same because I did have it a lot better than the Gallaghers did, but I really did relate to them growing up poor in America. And I think a lot of people do too. So without further ado, let's get on into Shameless Season 1. The series premiere opens up with a narration from the family's father, Frank, as a scene plays of all the family at a bonfire. Frank explains each of the kids' core personalities from his point of view. Shortly after describing each of the kids, a cutaway scene will play which either confirms or denies what Frank is talking about with each of the kids. For example, he claims that Lip is smart as a whip and has straight A's. And while all that may be true, as we'll come to see, in the very next quick cut, we witness him running from the police. I think this scene perfectly sets up the entire basis of the show. Some might say it does a little bit too much telling and not enough showing. I myself am not a huge fan when the show opens up with a monologue that explains the lore around each character, but here it actually works because it's used for satirical purposes. Each detail that Frank gives us is either a lie he's telling or a half-truth. He also claims that his 11-year-old daughter, Debbie, quote, raises money for UNICEF year-round, only for him to reveal the following sentence, that she doesn't actually donate any of it. This opening monologue is the perfect way to introduce us not only to the characters and setting, but also the very specific tone that this show has when it comes to the writing style. It also demonstrates to us just how much of an unreliable narrator that Frank is in the very first scene. Of all the characters we meet in the first scene, the audience no doubt feels like they know the most about Frank. We are also introduced to Kevin and Veronica, the Gallaghers' neighbors, who are also main characters in this show. And don't get it twisted, those two very much deserve to be main characters in this show. I would pay actual money to watch a spin-off of just Kevin and Veronica because oftentimes they have the best storylines. At the end of every season, I'm gonna show you guys specifically all of this says, but it's basically the timeline for each character. Each picture and each arrow basically correlates to that specific season that I'm gonna be talking about. So first we have Fiona. She basically took over the job as the mother for the kids when Monica, their mother, split. Fiona has to work multiple jobs in order to put food on the table for her siblings because Frank and their mother Monica, who is MIA, literally do not give a shit about the children. So Fiona, who's only 21 in season 1, mind you, is basically the one that's taking care of these kids and putting food on the table for them and paying their bills, you know, like going school shopping, getting groceries every week. This is basically their adoptive mother, just also happens to be their sister. Frank's oldest son and second oldest child, named Philip, aka Lip, everybody just calls him Lip, not a single person calls him Philip besides his teachers, and I think people who just genuinely do not know him like that. Lip is considered the smart one of the Gallagher clan, and he does really well in school. However, he also just happens to get into a lot of shit when it comes to the police. He's been arrested a couple times. Never one to respect authority. Philip definitely struggles with wanting to move up in life and possibly keep doing well in school, get a nice job, go to college maybe. Also just wanting to stay in the south side of Chicago with all of his siblings. Lip's potential to do really well in school and really well in finding a career for himself is constantly thrown in his face, and most of the time he really just wants to kick back and live life like the rest of his family. Next we have Ian, who's just 1 year younger than Lip. Ian's storyline in the first season is really just relegated to him exploring his sexuality and all the trials and tribulations that come with being gay in the south side of Chicago. Well, just in general in America, people aren't accepting, especially in the 2000s and 2010s. Another thing about Ian is he's very interested in going into the military someday, so we will see where that takes his character. Next we have Debbie, who in the first few seasons is definitely the most behaved Gallagher. She gets into some stuff later on, but in the first few seasons she's really just known as like the good kid, the nice kid, and like She's pretty smart herself too. Like, Lip definitely does better grades wise, but Debbie is smart for her age. I will give her that. She also suffers from the wants to grow up at a little too young of age syndrome, and she is constantly trying to do things that she's just not eligible for yet. And we'll get to see that as the series goes along. But yeah, as far as her personality goes, she's just a really kind, sweet child in this family of rambunctious people. Next, we have Carl, who is the most rambunctious of the siblings. He is melting Barbies. He is blowing things up. He's literally picking apart bones in the backyard all the time. They literally make jokes about Carl being a future serial killer. As you can tell, there's not a whole lot written about him, at least in the first few seasons, but as he gets older, obviously there's a lot more storylines that he's included in, and they give him a lot more to do. And finally, we have Frank. Now, Frank is, as I've said before, a deadbeat. He's really not a father to his children anymore. He really just comes and goes. Fiona says in one of the early episodes that he basically is only there at night when it comes to crashing, and then he's never in the same spot when she gets up for breakfast. There's a lot of dimensions to Frank's character, which I'll break down in this video and in the later videos in this series. The next scene gives us some insight into the kids' reality while living in poverty. Fiona passes around a cereal box for each kid to place money into.
Electric.
Yeah.
Each kid puts all the money they have on them in the cereal box for the electric bill. This clues us into how bad these kids actually have it. With no actual father there to provide for them, the kids really have to do it all on their own. The kids leave for school and Fiona leaves for her job, where she's harassed by two crusty men. So Lip arrives at a girl named Karen's house, and we meet mother to many, mother of all mothers, Sheila Jackson, everyone. You'd be smart to show some respect for her around me, because I'm not playing about this character, okay? This is the best character on TV. Joan Cusack, the woman that you are. Sheila is a middle-aged, agoraphobic housewife, and let me tell you, she is just about the most thrilling character this show has in the first few seasons. What Jessica Lange did for American Horror Story is what Joan Cusack did for Shameless. I literally will never stop gushing about her and her performance here in this show. It is too iconic. She doesn't have a whole lot to do here in the first few episodes, which is pretty similar to how Jessica Lange was used in the first few episodes of American Horror Story, but Sheila does get a lot more to do as season 1 goes along, especially when it comes to Frank. And oh boy, when the show does focus on Sheila, it is a television goldmine. Lip is at their house to give Karen some pointers on a science quiz. While he's doing that, she decides to have a little bit of fun underneath the kitchen table. After Lip comes home, he's like rummaging around trying to hide his dirty underwear so that Fiona won't see the stain on it. He's hiding it behind the dresser, and that's where he finds a gay magazine, if you know what I mean. He's a little bit in shock because this reveals to him that his younger brother Ian is gay. While Fiona and Veronica are at the club, Fiona's purse is randomly stolen when this guy comes out of nowhere to try and stop it from happening. Fiona figures out that the guy's name is Steve, and all three of them are kicked out of the bar because they leave and try to come back in, but they don't have stamps. So they are kicked out of the club, basically, and then they all head over to Fiona's house so that Steve can get patched up by Veronica, who has training as a nurse. At the end of the day, Lip tells Ian about his transgression with Karen, and then immediately switches to confronting Ian about the magazine that he found earlier that day.
Unless you got sucked off by a guy. For instance.
Ian is a little bit gagged. Meanwhile, Kevin shows up while Veronica is cleaning Steve's wound. I really love how you can tell Kevin and Veronica are very good friends of the Gallaghers just from their first scene together. The actors did such a good job at making these relationships feel so lived in the first episode. They have inside jokes with each other, and it seriously feels like they've just always been best friends. We are with Steve in this scene, finding out about the numerous relationships within this not completely functional family. Kevin and Veronica leave, and that is when Fiona and Steve start going at it. As they make out with such passion, they hear a knock at the door which stops them in their tracks. And it just so happens to be none other than the local police officer, Tony, who carries Frank inside the house.
Who the hell is that?
My dad.
A few days later, Frank arrives at Kevin's bar, the alibi room, with his disability check.
Disability people haven't caught up with you yet? I thought they had some guy following you around with a camera.
They can follow me around all they want to. They have to actually catch me doing something.
Steve arrives at the Gallaghers. After they were rudely interrupted last night, Steve still expects Fiona to go out with him, but she turns him down repeatedly before claiming that he's desperate. One thing about Fiona is she's always going to put herself down when she's around Steve because of their different upbringings. Lip decides to bring Ian to Karen so he can experience getting you-know-what from a girl. Ian is clearly uncomfortable in this situation, and Lip is watching this all happen. Sheila is also in the other room, distracted by her baking while all this is going down. And this is when Eddie, Karen's father, walks in and like drops an apple on the floor and then notices that Karen is underneath the table that they're literally doing it at.
What are you hiding for?
Elsewhere, Fiona receives a washing machine in the mail when she finds out it came from none other than Steve. Meanwhile, back at the Jackson house, Eddie has decided to move all of his shit out of the house. Sheila and Karen just kind of watch as he throws all his shit in a van and leaves. Fiona asks Ian if Frank gave him money for his upcoming field trip, to which Ian says no before Fiona walks over and takes all the coins out of Frank's pockets to hand to Ian.
Must get sick of having to think for everybody.
At least I can. Proves I'm wanted.
Got yourself a job for life with this joker.
Hey, get up. Dad, get up. Get up!
This scene is the first high drama one of the show. Up until this point, it's relied almost entirely on comedy, but this moment really showcases Fiona's struggle to parent these kids without her father's help. Fiona has a lot of these outburst moments, and the show really doesn't shy away from the reality of living with an alcoholic parent, as well as the daunting task of having to raise your siblings as your own. The next day, Fiona calls Steve, and he basically proclaims his love for her without actually saying it.
I swear, Fiona, you're nothing like anyone I've ever met. You make me want to enjoy my life again.
Keep in mind, this man has known her for 1 week. Steve meets Fiona at a restaurant where he brings up the fact that Fiona probably sees him as a snob. Fiona in turn takes this assumption as a snob move from him, so she tells him to stop making her apologize for her upbringing, something he insists that he's not actually doing. After a small argument between the two, Steve decides to reveal a crucial piece of his character, and that is that he sells and steals cars.
I don't buy and sell cars. I just sell them. But the cars I sell are mainly, not mine.
Still looking for fun, Fiona?
Meanwhile, Lip arrives at the Cash and Grab where Ian works and sees Ian and Cash, the owner, wearing each other's shoes. So he picks up on the fact that Ian is having sex with this older man. The next morning, Lip questions Ian's relationship with Cash. We can see Lip is kind of coming around to the idea of Ian being gay. He is not happy about the fact that he's dating an older man. Later that morning, Steve shows up for breakfast and is seemingly welcomed into the family. So this first episode borrows heavily from the British series. Almost every single scene is a carbon copy of the British one, just with a higher budget and more of an Americanized tone. The second episode of the season opens up with a bar fight between Eddie and Frank. The reason that Eddie Jackson attacked Frank is because of the whole Karen and Ian thing that happened a few days ago. Frank heads home and then decides to return the favor to Ian.
I'm just asking.
Guy in the bar said to pass it on.
Steve tries to defend the kids in this situation, but Fiona tells him to leave because it's really none of his business. He's still very new here. This becomes a recurring thing in the series. Frank shows absolutely no regard for his own children and will oftentimes physically or more commonly verbally degrade them in order to demonstrate how little shit he gives about them. Especially in earlier seasons, Frank shows a particular dislike for Ian, and the audience will become privy to exactly why that is later on in the season. Steve brings the kids breakfast, and Fiona decides to apologize for the outburst that happened the night prior. Moments later, Fiona realizes that she hasn't seen Frank all morning, and the rest of the kids echo this sentiment. We get the feeling that due to Frank being a complete deadbeat, him going missing isn't all that out of the realm of possibility, but because it is Disability Check Day, a lot of the kids are definitely very scared. After asking around the neighborhood and looking around for a while, the kids become increasingly worried about their father. Fiona's friend and the only good cop in this show, named Tony, files a missing persons report on Frank. Meanwhile, Lip heads to the alibi and learns from Kevin that not only was Steve with Frank at the alibi the night before, but it's possible that they could have left the bar together.
Frank Gallagher, did he leave with anybody when we kicked him out last night?
Name me one person who would be caught dead with him in that condition.
And Steve was definitely gone by then, so Frank went with him.
In here?
Yeah, talking to your dad. Friendly enough. I mean, but it was hours before closing.
After learning that Steve has been keeping all this from the Gallagher siblings, he runs to tell Fiona.
When?
10:30. Went to apologize, bought him a drink, and went home.
Why didn't you say it?
All of a sudden, Kevin barges in and announces that there was a body found underneath the L. So all the kids rush over to the L and find out that the body is not Frank's. Meanwhile, we catch up with Frank, and he has woken up in Canada. Frank is immediately arrested because of the lack of ID that he has on him. Back in Chicago, somehow Tony the cop finds out that Frank is in Canada. Gallaghers come up with a plan to smuggle Frank across the border yet again. And this is when Fiona randomly gets the urge to search through her trash can, and she finds what I believe are Steve's cigarettes, which have Canadian health warnings on them. This tells Fiona all that she needs to know.
How'd you get my dad to Toronto?
Canadian health warnings.
Because he took a swing at you?
No, because he's got a family that he doesn't give a shit about.
What my dad is, what my family is, has fuck all to do with you.
Steve heads back to Canada to smuggle Frank back over the border. Frank begins walking door to door to ask people if he can live with them, and each neighbor, each person that he goes to, says no. Lip is following him from behind on some kid's bike.
I don't like the way I'm being talked to around my own house. You never got me this, Dad. We're gonna have that, Dad. Yak, yak, fucking yak. All 6 of you. Never mind I'm a single parent. Never mind you wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for me. Life is hard. We all know that. Money is harder. I can only stretch it so far.
Forget you owe money?
Everybody thinks I owe them money. I didn't split like your mom did. I could have.
Lip eventually turns around and leaves Frank alone because he's so done hearing Frank rant about random shit. Frank claims he's exhausted of his children and the responsibilities he has to take on without the kid's mother. The obvious irony here is that Frank is so absent from his kids' lives. Fiona is literally the one doing all of it. This scene where Frank is walking towards the camera and basically airing out all his grievances about his kids is too good, you guys. It literally gets reposted all the time on TikTok, and every single time I watch it, I literally have to watch the entire thing unbroken because the performance here is on another level, okay? William H. Macy, he really is just that good. So, out of luck, Frank decides to go to the bar, and that is where he's confronted by Eddie. The two men decide to bury the hatchet, and Eddie decides to go on a rant of his own about his daughter and his wife. This is when a light bulb goes off in Frank's head. He sees Eddie moving out as this grand opportunity for him to go and try and manipulate Sheila into letting him stay with her, now that there's an opening at the old Jackson house.
Apology? Not apology, just I'm Frank. Ian's dad, Lip's dad.
Oh, the twins. Oh.
No, I heard about what happened. Eddie leaving. Oh. I just wanted to say I'm sorry.
That's very thoughtful of you. Come in, Frank. You have to take your shoes off.
After successfully manipulating Sheila, he asks if he can take a bath, and once his bath is complete, she brings him some of Eddie's old clothes. And let it be known that these two are very, very flirtatious with each other. Let's just say Frank propositions her, and not only does she agree, she grabs a towel and ties it around his head before dragging him into the bedroom like a dog on a leash and handcuffing him to the bed, whipping out the largest collection of adult toys that you could possibly ever come across. So this reveals to us that Sheila is a dominatrix in housewives' clothes. Some will say this is a little bit too far, and Shameless is very much known for pushing the envelope when it comes to this kind of thing. This is technically an assault, and the show pokes fun at Frank and Sheila's relationship going forward. As much as I hate Frank, I don't think he needs to be sexually abused, or that it needs to be played for laughs. for that matter. And I love the character of Sheila, don't get me wrong. Her weird sexual fantasies are part of her character, but sometimes in hindsight it is a little bit too far, especially since this is basically the R word and it's played for laughs. Back at the Gallaghers, Steve arrives with a van full of roses as an apology to Fiona. Fiona rejects it because she wants absolutely nothing to do with Steve, especially after the whole situation with Frank being smuggled over the border. She tells Steve to go home and she'll pay him back whenever she can for the roses. However, he insists that it's a gift. The third episode opens with a girl named Mandy flirting with Ian while he's at work. Ian pretends to be into her just for her to go away. And Cash is watching this whole thing, which is just a little bit creepy if you ask me. Like, sir, you are in your 30s. Mandy leaves, and after Ian's shift is over, he kisses Cash on the lips in an alleyway. So I think it's about time I talk about the age gap here. The show never spends time trying to convince us that it's wrong and illegal. And that's because it's trying to convince us the entire time that it's fine because Ian is gay, and in the showrunners' minds, it's only statutory R word if it's a straight man and a woman. There are a couple relationships like this throughout the show, and that's probably just because Shameless is a product of its time. Even in the late 2010s, age gap relationships were all too common in television. It wasn't really until the Me Too movement in 2016, 2017, 2018 that we started to see it a little bit less. Do we still have relationships like this on screen today? Well, yes, but I'd make the argument that for the most part, the TV shows aren't really trying to convince us that it's okay anymore. They won't go as far as to completely stop showing underage teens getting taken advantage of, but they will more often than not implement an arc for the character that demonstrates either a willingness to escape said abusive relationship or an instance where a close friend or family member tells them how fucked up it is. I can't speak for every single show, but you'd really think in 2024 we would know better. But there still are some creators out there that haven't learned, so I wouldn't be surprised if we haven't actually moved on from these illegal displays of what's actually considered to be normal on screen. At the Gallagher house, Mandy has joined Ian on the couch. She makes Carl leave so that she can be alone with Ian. Carl teases Ian by telling him he's going to be getting an STD before making his exit. After numerous attempts to get with him by Mandy, Ian turns her down. Fiona then arrives with Tony after a very spirited scene in his car. The next morning, Fiona and Veronica talk about Fiona's choices between Steve and Tony. She's very clearly into both guys, but she doesn't know who to choose. Fiona seems like she wants to be more inclined to choose Tony, but that's only because they've known each other their entire lives. Steve brings way more excitement to her, and she definitely is torn between the two. Meanwhile, Mandy's brothers, including Mickey Milkovich, show up to Ian's work to try and beat him up for an alleged assault Ian committed against Mandy. Meanwhile, at the Gallagher house, a social security agent arrives.
Isn't this a house? Oh, Aunt Ginger.
Is she here?
She lives in a nursing home in Wisconsin.
I have reason to believe someone may be cashing your aunt's checks without her consent. I have your aunt's next Social Security check with me now. How about I come back in the morning, say around 10, and deliver the check to your aunt in person?
After Fiona confronts Frank about Aunt Ginger's whereabouts, Frank brings home a random homeless man that he finds on the street and dresses him as a woman to pass off as Ginger. Fiona then learns the truth about Aunt Ginger, and that is that Frank has been cashing her checks for the last 12 years because Aunt Ginger is, drumroll please, dead. Fiona tells Frank he's going to end up in jail if they don't sort this whole issue out. Fiona and Veronica then come up with a genius plan to borrow a woman from an assisted living facility that Veronica works at. The next morning, the interview goes really smoothly, surprisingly, and the Social Security agent ends up handing the check to Frank, who immediately gets it stolen from him by Fiona so she can pay the gas bill. The next morning, Ian tries to apologize to Mandy, and he eventually does tell her that he's gay, which suddenly prompts her to be a little bit more accepting towards him. She calls her brothers off and prevents any other attacks on Ian, and a beautiful friendship between Mandy and Ian is started. Fiona then returns Aunt Ginger to the group home, and this upsets Debbie because Debbie got really close with this fake Aunt Ginger. She is giving a performance here. Fiona then shows up to Steve's work and finally asks him out. We now know that Fiona has chosen Steve over Tony. At the beginning of episode 4, Debbie kidnaps a literal child from a birthday party to play dress up with, all because Fiona won't buy her a doll. The Gallaghers devise a plan to return the baby without anyone thinking that they did anything suspicious to the child, because Debbie made the colossal mistake of changing the clothes that this baby was in. Meanwhile, at the alibi room, a group of girls hit on Kevin, but he turns them down and tells them he's engaged. Frank overhears this and tells the entire bar that Kevin and Veronica are getting married.
Carol! Carol! Carol, come here! No. Kev's making an honest woman out of your daughter!
You what?
Yeah!
Oh my God!
The Gallaghers successfully return Casey, who looks relatively unharmed, and Debbie gets a lot of money from the people on the street at the birthday party for returning the baby safely. Meanwhile, Kevin comes home and drunkenly proposes to Veronica. So Kevin and Veronica are getting married, baby. Oh, I also forgot to mention there's a scene where Karen is bathing and Frank walks in by accident and he tries to leave, but then she asks him to grab a towel for her. Truly disgusting work by the writers. She's looking at him in a very sexual way and it's just foul. One of the most regrettable things that the show does in its first season is portray every single victim as the person with the power here. Karen is portrayed as a sexual equal to Frank here, and while Frank is uncomfortable for sure, he ultimately doesn't stop anything she does or says around him. At the end of the episode, the Gallaghers celebrate Kevin and Veronica's engagement, and seemingly out of nowhere, Kevin seems a bit down considering the circumstances. When Fiona pushes to know why he's so upset, he tells her he's already married and cannot marry Veronica.
You know, for a guy who just got engaged, you don't seem very happy to be getting married.
It's because I'm already married.
The gag. At the beginning of the episode, Fiona tries to convince Veronica to call off the wedding while there's some reason trying to steal toilet paper from a public restroom. Due to Fiona's knowledge of Kevin's current marital status, she tries to get Veronica to back out of the marriage herself so she doesn't have to learn about Kevin's marriage right away. Elsewhere, Frank has an appointment with a doctor who believes he might need a biopsy due to him having a growth down there. And right after this, the doctor decides to schedule an appointment for the biopsy. Meanwhile, Kevin and Veronica both share the opinion that they might not be ready to get married after all, before deciding to just go ahead and cancel the wedding. That is until Veronica's mother, Carol, shows up with the news that Veronica's father set aside a big sum of money for Veronica if she ever were to get married. With this new information, Veronica and Kevin decide to bring the wedding back on. However, later that day, Kevin tells Veronica he can't marry her because he's already married. Later in the episode, Fiona suggests not filing a marriage license and instead having a fake wedding so that they can still get all the gifts from everybody at the wedding and also the money from Veronica's father. Frank has his biopsy the following day and shortly after this attends a support group for cancer survivors. Frank is just so unserious in this scene.
Just knowing your tits are trying to kill you, that's gotta suck. Mine's in my balls. So they've got a reason to be pissed. Tucked between two legs.
Kevin and Veronica try to reject the priest that Carol provides them, and Carol says that they're literally not allowed to get married unless they have a priest, because that's what Veronica's father wanted. So Carl, Ian, and Lip decide to go kidnap a priest of their own. Later on, Ian visits Cash's house while Linda is away with the kids, and when he sees all the decor, he freaks out and leaves. This season in particular has a lot of Islamophobia. I was literally shocked when I was rewatching season 1 and saw the amount of jokes they make about Middle Eastern people in general. At one point, they literally make an Israel-Palestine joke that is horrid to hear in this day and age. By the way, I have some links down below if you would like to go down and support some GoFundMes for the current situation in that area of the world. Anyway, this show is not woke whatsoever, but it does talk about certain issues and has the let's poke fun at everyone mentality instead of deliberately choosing sides. However, the amount of racist and Islamophobic jokes that they make to poke fun at Arab people is deplorable, to be honest with you. I mean, seriously, the one and only Middle Eastern character this show has, Cash, is portrayed as a predator, and spoiler, doesn't stay around in this show for too long. So the morning after the bachelor's party, Veronica's older brother, who we've literally never heard about and won't hear about again, shows up and essentially tries to ruin their wedding. Veronica and Fiona tie him up to the toilet so that he can't ruin the wedding. After the reception, Carol hands Veronica the cash and she finds out that it's only $500. So at the beginning of the episode at the Jackson house, Sheila refuses to make breakfast for Eddie.
The banana and blueberry are spectacular.
Oh, so good, Mom.
Really?
Frank has completely moved in at this point and is clearly Sheila's new man. But Eddie has also moved back in after not really being able to move out, so all four of them are just coexisting in this house, and it's a very interesting situation to say the least. I mean, Karen even asks Frank to attend parents' night for her instead of Eddie, who is sitting right there as an option. Meanwhile, at the Gallaghers, the gas is cut because they were late on their bill. Steve tries to pay the bill for them, but Fiona claims that she has it under control. This is a recurring issue in their relationship. Whenever Fiona or the Gallaghers in general are down on their luck, Steve is right there willing to pay for it. But Fiona has too much, like, I don't know, pride to take the money from Steve because she wants every single thing to be fair, and she thinks that if he gives her money that she's gonna owe him, but Steve tries to tell her that that's just not the case. This is when Carl hands Fiona a note from his teacher. The note demands Carl bring a parent for parents' night because he's been very troubled as of late. On his way out of the house to take the kids to school, he hands Fiona the money yet again, and Fiona again hands the money back to Steve because she claims she can handle it herself. After Steve leaves with the kids, two big scary looking men threaten Fiona and tell her to get Frank to pay up. Fiona confronts Frank at the bar about this whole situation before demanding he show up for parents' night for Carl. This is when the two men from before storm into the bar and chase Frank out of there. Fiona meets with Carl's principal before parents' night, and he tells her to bring a parent or a guardian, or else he's going to have to call CPS.
Come back tonight with a parent, or a call will be placed to a place you don't want me to call.
We then get a funny ass scene where Sheila lets in the two men that are hunting Frank down. She just asks them to please put their shoes in bags because she is a germaphobe. Frank is chased by the men yet again. He does manage to get away from them. However, when he tries to get back into Sheila's house, the two men are waiting for him just outside. After Karen comes home, Frank tells her to divert the men's attention so he can sneak back in, and that's when she says,
"Promise me you'll come to school for me tonight, and I'll do it."
Don't fight, Jesus! Everything's got to be quid pro fucking quo. Go!
This episode also reveals to us that Lip frequently takes SATs for other students. That is until he's caught by a professor from the University of Chicago. He makes Lip take a new version of the test in a private session so he can see if Lip is truly gifted or if he's cheating. Now, Lip is just so smart. He gets a perfect score on this new version of the test, proving the level of intellect that we're dealing with this one. The professor offers Lip an internship, but Lip literally says he does not want to go to college. Like, he just wants to get a normal job. The college professor tells Lip that he has to call all the people he tested for and tell them that their scores are now invalid. At the parent-teacher conference, Fiona and the younger siblings band together to prove that their bond as a family are more than enough security for Carl to learn what's right and wrong. Essentially, they're trying to prove that their home is stable enough for Carl to live in. The principal does not believe any of this, and he threatens to call CPS if a parent or guardian does not show up. Steve waltzes in and solves everyone's problems. He pretends that him and Fiona have just filed for guardianship of the kids. The principal is still not believing any of this until Steve takes him aside and they smoke a little green together, and he ends up buying Carl some time. Elsewhere, Frank is learning about how well Karen is doing in her classes. Frank puts on a happy face even though he absolutely despises school and teachers and, well, just the American education system in general. That's when the two scary men come in and clear the room of people before threatening Frank one last time.
They said she was developing into an incredibly poised young woman.
Poised? Oh, she is. How am I gonna help her be the woman she's supposed to be if I'm locked up in this house? Life is going on all around me and I'm missing out.
At the beginning of episode 7, Mandy, Lip, and Ian find a broken down meat truck, and after sending the driver away on a wild goose chase, they call everyone in the neighborhood about raiding the truck. This episode also sees Steve bribing all the siblings to get them to admit to Fiona that they'll be fine without her for one night. Fiona just doesn't believe them and continues to turn Steve down on his offer. According to Steve, Fiona thinks the world would stop spinning on its axis if she takes one night off from the kids. We also get a line here where he tells her to put her oxygen mask on.
You know when a plane starts going down and they tell you to put your mask on before helping anyone else? Put your mask on, Fiona.
Yeah? Well, I've never been on a plane.
She really gagged him there. Steve eventually takes Liam and brings him to Sheila's without Fiona's knowledge. And let me tell you, Sheila is so ecstatic to be with Liam.
Look after Liam. I'd love to. I can keep him in my room until Karen goes to college.
However, Liam decides to play a surprise game of hide and go seek, which results in him opening the front door and escaping, prompting Sheila to attempt to leave the house for the first time in 5 years. Sheila straps herself to the house with bed sheets, which is just so iconic, before heading outside and grabbing Liam. This has got to be one of my favorite Sheila scenes in this entire show. She just gets to be so outlandish with her performance. It also does bring a lot of light to people with OCD and agoraphobia and even some social anxiety. Not many TV shows tackle those subjects all that well, and while it is definitely played for laughs in this show, I think they ended up doing it really well. Fiona learns that Frank has been putting each of the kids in hundreds of dollars of debt by using their names to max out credit cards for himself. Obviously enraged by this, she heads to the alibi to confront Frank about it. At the cash and grab, Linda learns about Mickey Milkovich's frequent habit of stealing from the store, and then decides to reinstall the security cameras to ensure that nothing happens. She even threatens Ian and Cash, basically stating that she is going to be watching those cameras like a hawk. Ian and Cash believe that they can just move the cameras and create a bit of a blind spot where Linda won't see them having sex. However, their attempt to hide their transgression from Linda fails when she just manually moves the camera down and sees the entire thing happen. Imagine finding out that your husband is gay and is sleeping with a minor. Oh, it would be over. It would be over immediately. Veronica reveals to Fiona that her and Kevin are getting a foster child because they want to, quote, test drive a child before they decide to try and have their own. Fiona debates with Veronica about the possibility of her going on vacation with Steve. Veronica tells her she's just overthinking it and she just needs to go and do it. While chatting with a homeless man, Frank comes up with a plan to fake his death in order to throw those two men off his trail. He asks his kids and Kevin and Veronica for their help in getting this whole thing put together, as he has only 24 hours to successfully fake his death. Fiona then decides to go to the hotel with Steve. The next day, Ian confronts Mickey about the gun. After a short little tussle, both of them kind of look at each other, and in the heat of the moment, they both rip each other's clothes off. This is where it's revealed that Mickey, this crusty man right here, is queer. Mickey Milkovich is the prime example of the closeted gay homophobe trope that plagued our screens in the early 2000s to late 2010s. As society became more accepting of gay, lesbian, and bisexual people, and even transgender people, Hollywood had a lot of catching up to do. And I'm not saying that Shameless does its queer representation badly, because it doesn't. Ian does not feel like a gay stereotype, and that's why I love him and his portrayal so much, because they didn't make his entire character about his sexuality. However, Shameless does fall into the equally frustrating trap with its other closeted queer character, Mickey. And if you want me to shower their relationship in praise and flowers, think again, because I have some choice words for their relationship. Mickey is the quintessential straight-passing white man. He's portrayed in a very racist, homophobic, transphobic way, constantly yelling out slurs and profanities. The thing about Mickey is that in the first couple seasons, he's always dirty. I'm talking dirt in the nails, untrimmed beard, just nasty hygiene in general. I praise the fact that Ian wasn't a walking stereotypical gay who dresses in a more feminine way, but Mickey is on a whole nother level of anti-gay stereotype. He dresses not only like a straight man, but a straight man who has very right-leaning tendencies where toxic masculinity rules his behavior. For God's sakes, he literally has Nazi memorabilia in his room and was raised by a neo-Nazi himself. A show like Shameless has such a diverse audience, and a lot of people on the right side of the aisle tune in to watch the show. The show exposes that audience to a queer character in a way that doesn't make them automatically want to turn the TV off, which is pretty impressive. Shameless is able to do this because Ian is not just the same walking stereotype that the right of center audience would probably be used to seeing on their screens. Going forward, Ian and Mickey have a very long and complicated relationship, and I'll break down each terrible decision the writers make along the way. Just be aware of the fact that Ian is a good example of how to shift viewer perception of gay people, and Mickey is a horrible example. Fiona and Steve pick Liam up from Sheila's, who is upset to see him go. After arriving home, Debbie briefs Fiona on the plan to get everyone looking funeral ready for Frank. The two men arrive at Frank's wake.
Sorry for your loss.
It was a shock.
I'm sure. Accident, was it? Suicide.
They decide to call their boss, and he says he needs to see Frank's body. Fiona and the others tell Veronica to go distract the two men while they replace Frank's body in the coffin with a bunch of the meat that they had left over. The 8th episode opens with Frank collapsing in the middle of the road before we cut to 2 days later, where he wakes up in a hospital bed and is given a proposition by his doctors who are doing a study on alcoholism.
We would like you to participate in our medical study.
Your what?
In my whole career, I've never seen such a spectacular display of alcoholism.
Thank you.
There's a side plot this episode where Debbie looks at Steve's phone and sees that he has a romantic sounding text from a mystery woman named Candace. Debbie brings her concerns to Fiona, who dismisses it at first, but then confronts Steve about it. He tells her that it is a coworker of his, but she still doesn't really trust that that's the truth. Then we catch up with Sheila, who goes on a men who are missing website because she hasn't heard from Frank in a few days.
Mother. Frank! Oh, Frank! Frank! Oh, I'm worried about you.
Frank finally returns to Sheila's, and after a short reunion between the two, he finds out that staying sober is going to be a lot harder than he had originally thought. He asks Sheila to keep him entertained, and that's when she whips out this absolutely mean dance.
That's good, Shields. That's really good.
Meanwhile, Kevin and Veronica meet their new foster child named Ethel, who was removed from a religious sect recently. Frank has returned to the Gallagher house and has begun to warm up to Debbie yet again because Debbie provides him with an endless amount of sugar that has essentially replaced his alcohol addiction. The Gallagher kids try to keep Frank busy in this really fun montage of them running up and down the stairs and all around the house. A little bit later, Lip tries to warn the younger kids about Frank and about the fact that he's probably not going to stay sober for too long, so they shouldn't expect Frank to be all happy and in their lives all that often. Meanwhile, Steve arrives to his mother's house, and it is revealed here that Steve is not his name. His presumed older brother calls him Jimmy.
We're all in the kitchen having tea.
Yeah, I'll be right there.
I'll tell your mother.
I mean, I got 3 fucking kids at home and you're going balls deep in that? Killing me, Jimmy.
So Steve has lied about the name, he's lied about the background, and he's lied about the whole car situation and the fact that he has a girlfriend that kisses him on the mouth when he gets to his mother's house. After a particularly hard day at work, Fiona asks Frank to get a job now that he's sober. However, Frank is too busy reading to the kids to answer her. While looking at her disheveled tips, Fiona breaks down in tears, still feeling like she's the only one pulling her weight. She has to work multiple degrading waitress jobs just to put food on the table for the kids. The next morning, Fiona and the others force Frank to drink again after he attempts to demolish their house. At the end of the episode, Debbie makes note of the address attached to Candace's name in Steve's phone. Debbie is genuinely the smartest sibling in this group of kids because nobody else has been able to figure out that there's something off about Steve. The 9th episode of the series opens with Debbie and Veronica staking out the address that was found in Steve's phone. Veronica is quick to shut down any speculation Debbie may have about what the address might be. Debbie tells Veronica she believes it's Steve's mistress due to the car's license plate, which says Delish. While at the club with Steve, Fiona reveals to him that usually at this point in the relationship, her boyfriends start ghosting her, implying that she has a gut feeling he's about to do the same to her. Steve brushes this off and they continue with their night. In the Jackson house, Eddie pleads with Karen to go to a chastity ball to, quote, confess her sexual sins and make it right with God. At first, Karen is completely unwilling to go anywhere with him, but after hearing him offer up his car to her, she decides to give it a shot. Elsewhere, Frank gets a call from his lawyer claiming that his settlement money is imminent. He heads over to his lawyer's office, which is completely cluttered, and she reveals to him that he will need to go get his wife Monica's signature in order to get the settlement money, due to the fact that she's a joint claimant on the lawsuit.
All I need is your signature and Monica's, and the money is all yours.
Me and Monica.
Yay, that was a hell of a warm-up. Unfortunately, those aren't the originals. You two will have to go down to the city legal offices and do it in person.
Frank tells his lawyer he has absolutely no idea where Monica could be, but he says he does have a phone number he can try. Because Frank is too scared to call Monica himself, he asks Sheila to impersonate a woman giving away prizes while on the phone with her. She calls Monica and tells her that she's won a teddy bear.
And a teddy bear, and a great big teddy bear. She's crying. Oh, fuck. Oh, yeah, no, I've never won anything either. I'm thrilled for you. Anyway.
Meanwhile, Debbie arrives back at the house she was stalking the night before and meets the woman who lives there. It's revealed that this woman is Steve's mother, and moments after Debbie starts talking with her, Steve turns the corner and sees Debbie in the house. Debbie's suspicions are confirmed when his mother calls him Jimmy. Up until this point, Steve has built quite the reputation with Fiona's younger siblings. This would be the first instance where Debbie sees right through Steve. This honestly happens in real life too. Kids can see through to the soul of a person, and oftentimes more than other adults. Debbie had a bad feeling about Steve. Otherwise, why would she check his phone in the first place? Veronica was quick to dismiss Debbie and never really looked further into Steve. Lip and Ian were too busy with their own lives, so of course Debbie felt like she had to play detective herself. Steve chases after her and assures her that he loves Fiona and the kids so much, he even reveals to her that he actually bought the house next door for Fiona and Steve to live in, so that if Fiona were to move, they wouldn't be too far away from the original Gallagher house. At Kevin and Veronica's house, Ethel visits with her son. Yes, she has a son, and she is one of 5 sister wives. I think I forgot to mention that. Frank arrives to the store and the audience finally meets the kids' mother, Monica. Upon seeing his wife, Frank enters a sort of love-struck paralysis for a moment. He hasn't seen her in what can be presumed to be over a year, and he hopes that even in this tumultuous situation he's put her in, she'll fall back into his arms. That is until he sees her with a woman named Roberta, Bob for short. Now, if you're wondering how he and ultimately the show handles Monica being a bisexual woman in a lesbian relationship, well, not very well. They kind of just make a ton of jokes about their relationship. This is yet another example of the hit or miss handling of queer characters within this show. Monica herself is essentially presented as a woman who, quote, went crazy and turned lesbian. According to Frank anyway, she hasn't ever been into women before him or during him. It was only when they split that she started to explore her sexuality. Our introduction into Monica is also intertwined with the reveal that she left Frank for a black woman, something Frank is particularly very upset about because he's very racist and homophobic. Side note, the constant portrayal of black women, and in particular black lesbians in media, as overly masculine and manly is egregiously overdone. After Monica walks out of the store disappointed, she gets back in the semi-truck before seeing Frank and figuring out that he manipulated this whole thing. Monica and her new girlfriend chase after Frank in this giant semi, and Kevin, who just happens to be in the same parking lot as them, takes Frank to Sheila's. Meanwhile, Sheila and Debbie are baking together, and this is so cute and fun. I just love these two together. Frank storms into Sheila's with Kevin to avoid Monica and her girlfriend.
Lock the door! Lock the door!
So Monica arrives at Sheila's and she reunites with Debbie. Debbie obviously is in a state of shock because she hasn't seen her mother in so long. This scene gave me goosebumps. I was emotional. Monica claims that Frank almost destroyed her. Sheila interrupts them in order to give them bags to put on their shoes.
You might put some bags on. Can you put some bags on your feet? On my feet. I need you to put bags on.
So Debbie goes back to her house and tells everybody that Monica is over at Sheila's, and the mood in the room just completely drops. This is serious for everyone in this family. They haven't seen Monica in a really long time, and most of them do not have a good relationship with her. After Debbie accidentally reveals to Fiona that Steve bought her a house, all the Gallaghers gather together and head over to Sheila's to confront their mother. Meanwhile, Sheila tells Monica she needs to apologize to Frank.
Apologies? For walking out on this piece of shit? No, for walking out on them.
Oh my god.
Ian runs to Mickey's house and tells him to meet him at the Cash and Grab later that night. Cash also finds out that Ian is sleeping with Mickey at this point. Cash shoots Mickey in the leg because Mickey is kind of being an asshole about it. Meanwhile, back at Sheila's, Monica says she knew the kids would be fine with Fiona, which is not a justification at all. Just because the kids would be fine with Fiona doesn't mean that she necessarily needed to up and leave them. The Gallaghers learn here that Frank knew where Monica was and knew how to contact her and just never went back for her. And this obviously upsets most of the kids because Frank could have gotten Monica a lot sooner, but he chose not to. Bob then claims that Liam belongs with a mixed race family, which is just absolutely absurd because Monica hasn't even been in Liam's life. She is believed to have left the family like weeks after Liam was born. This scene is so good, you guys. You don't understand.
Berta and I want to start a family of our own. Well, how about you finish this one first? You don't get to abandon your kids and then show up one day to take your pick of the litter.
Oh, now that's not fair.
Shut up, Frank. This isn't about you. This is about you. This is about what you didn't do. It's about what I did. I did a fucking great job. They did it all. No thanks to you because you weren't here.
Monica is really too stunned to speak at this moment. She tries to lessen the blow by saying that she's here now and that
Liam belongs with me. He doesn't even know who you are. I'm his mother. You are my mother too.
Fiona then claims that she's done raising the kids.
So I'm done. I'm done with the school and the bills and the clinics. I'm done.
Aside from the iffy portrayal of Monica and her lesbian relationship in this episode, this is genuinely some of the best writing and acting that this show has ever seen and will ever see. Monica is a character that I think inevitably had to show up, just to obviously be true to the source material and to also give the United States viewers an explanation as to why she left and what she's been up to and what each of these characters' relationships with her were like. This episode answers so many of those questions and poses a lot of new ones, such as what is Fiona gonna do now that Monica is back? Is Frank going to try and steal Monica away from Bob? Is Monica gonna try and stay with the kids? This episode is heavily based on the 6th episode of the British series titled Monica Comes Home. In the British version of that episode, Monica is found by Frank because he wants her to pay child support. Early in the morning, Monica is already struggling to balance everything like permission slips and school lunches. She's clearly very overwhelmed. Lip confronts Bob about them potentially taking Liam from them, and yeah, Lip, he kind of mothers here.
We having a problem? Philip?
I don't know, Bob. Let's see, you're camped out in my house. You're f***ing my mother and you're talking about stealing my baby brother. Why would we have a problem?
Just as the rest of his siblings, Lip is very upset about the fact that Monica basically left them a few years ago. You can literally see it in his eyes in this scene, how betrayed he feels. For him, it's too little too late at this point with Monica. He doesn't want to try and rebuild his relationship with her because he knows that she's probably just gonna leave again. Monica tells Bob that she's beginning to have second thoughts about leaving with Liam. She asks Bob if they can stay and raise all the kids together. It's alluded to in this season, but not really confirmed until later on, but Monica has bipolar disorder, and that's why she's claiming to Bob here that she's better now because Bob is in her life. Monica and Bob also ask Frank to get Fiona on board with them taking Liam in exchange for Monica signing the court document so that Frank can get the settlement money. Unsurprisingly, Fiona is unwilling to let Monica take Liam. Later on, Monica and Bob head over to the fertility clinic to figure out if Frank is Liam's, which would tell them if Monica is legally allowed to take Liam without Frank's consent. Ian and Lip decide to follow Bob and Monica to the fertility clinic to get their DNA tested as well. Elsewhere, Steve is pulled over by Tony, who gives him a warning about his treatment towards Fiona. This definitely does shake Steve to the core. Monica and Bob find out that Liam is in fact Frank's, and word eventually gets out to Fiona and Lip, who confront Frank about the whole situation at the bar. This is what he has to say about the whole matter.
Ooh. I thought that was always a rumor about Nana Gallagher having an affair with that sax player.
Meanwhile, at dinner, Lip opens the DNA test results in front of everyone and reveals that Ian is in fact not Frank Gallagher's son.
Congratulations, Ian. You are not Frank Gallagher's son.
However, it is revealed that Ian might be one of Frank's brother's sons, meaning that Monica cheated on Frank with one of his brothers.
You fucked my brother. What's next? You gonna take up with a black lady, man? How can we get back together now?
I have never, ever had any intention of getting back together with you, Frank. You only tricked me into coming here to get some settlement money.
I wanted to see you again.
So you pretended that she won a teddy bear?
You know how much I love teddy bears.
In other news, Karen and Eddie decide to go to the chastity ball where she's supposed to confess her sexual sins. And upon doing exactly that, Eddie slut shames her.
I didn't have intercourse until the 8th grade. I didn't like it at first, but then around the 6th time, I started to feel good. But I didn't feel good about it. And then there was a time at Minnie Carlson's sleepover when we all got in the shower and started soaping each other up. And then her mom walked in and freaked out when she saw Mindy in the shower with a big
Whores don't get cars.
After getting home, Karen trashes all of Eddie's stuff in the basement. Sheila tries to comfort Karen the best she can in the moment before returning upstairs and seeing Eddie in his pool of sorrow about his daughter's past sexual encounters. Sheila has absolutely no care in the world to see Eddie anymore. She basically kicks him out at this point, even going as far as to go outside and ensure that he makes it into his car. This is a really big step for Sheila because it's the first instance where she's fully comfortable being outside with no help from bed sheets. At the end of the episode, all the Gallaghers convene in Fiona's new house and prepare to go up against Monica and Bob as a united front so that she won't take their baby brother. To their surprise, Monica hands Liam over to Fiona. After Monica leaves, everything basically goes back to normal. Fiona moves back in with the Gallaghers, Monica and Bob go back to where they came from, and Frank obviously loses out on all the settlement money because Monica never signed the court document. At the beginning of the 11th episode, Fiona tells Lip and Ian to go visit their Grammy if they want to know more information about Frank's brothers. Later on, at a PTA meeting, Fiona decides to try and make friends with the other moms who are just a bit snobby compared to her. However, there is one mother there named Jasmine who takes it upon herself to take Fiona under her wing and later on in the night takes her out for drinks. Oh yeah, and I would be remiss if I forgot to mention the fact that Jasmine, as she's leaving the bar, kisses Fiona on the lips.
Hi. Okay. Bye.
Later on, Tony arrives at the Gallagher house to warn Fiona about Steve. He says that Steve is not the person that Fiona thinks he is. As soon as Tony leaves, she tries to call Steve, but Steve is not picking up. We also get a scene where Debbie and Carl help Frank look for jobs after he is informed that his disability benefits have been canceled. Lip decides to go see Karen before him and Ian go try to find out who Ian's father is. Since the purity ball, Karen has taken up metal music and has pierced her nose. She's also become quite destructive, ruining almost everything that Eddie had downstairs. Lip then decides to shame Karen because she's complaining about the fact that her father did the exact same thing a few days prior at that ball. Later on, Lip and Ian go visit their Grammy.
So what do you want?
We're trying to find Dad's brothers. What might be my dad?
How so?
Monica boned a brother.
I never liked that woman. Clayton, Jerry, and my baby Wyatt. They're in the book.
Later on, Karen now has black hair, and so that's how you know she's really going through her edgy, emo, alternative phase. She's on a webcam cutting her hair shorter as she airs out all of her grievances towards her father. The next day, Ian and Lip meet one of Frank's brothers named Jerry.
What do you want?
Hi, I'm sorry. My name is Philip. This is my brother Ian.
Yeah, so?
Well, we're Frank Gallagher's sons, and we were wondering maybe if we could...
Ian and Lip arrive at their Uncle Clayton's house, and almost immediately the audience will recognize a striking resemblance between Ian and Clayton, almost confirming the fact that Clayton is Ian's real father. Even Clayton's wife, Lucy, is somewhat suspicious of the fact that the two look so similar. Ian storms out of the house before Clayton and Lucy can return. Lip is somewhat confused as to why Ian doesn't want to get to know his own dad. Ian tells him he likes the life he has. He doesn't want to be separated from his siblings and move in with a new family that he barely knows. He now has the closure he needed by knowing who his father is, but that doesn't mean he wants to get to know the guy either. Elsewhere, Steve is caught by Tony trying to break into a car. Steve is immediately arrested while Tony is off duty. After beating Steve up pretty bad, Tony decides to let Steve go on the condition that Steve leaves Chicago and never comes back, not even to say goodbye to Fiona. Meanwhile, Frank has gotten a new job since his disability checks have stopped coming in. Frank cannot stand to be a functioning member of society, so he believes that the only way to get his disability back is to permanently injure himself. He tries various ways at first, but none of them succeed. Finally, he does decide to take a staple gun to his hand, and that is what eventually sends him to the hospital. After leaving their Uncle Clayton's house, Lip and Ian are pulled over while driving Steve's stolen car. Tony arrives on the scene to find out that it's Lip and Ian that have been pulled over. Meanwhile, we find out that Fiona and her new friend Jasmine are at a St. Patrick's Day party. Fiona is really paranoid about Steve, seeing as she hasn't heard from him in a while, and he was supposed to show show up at the party that day. Moments later, she gets a call from the police station revealing to her that her brothers have been arrested while driving a stolen car. At the end of the episode, we are greeted by one of the worst scenes this show has ever presented us. Frank comes home from the hospital heavily doped up on painkillers. He finds Karen sulking downstairs. After yelling at him to go away, Karen instead decides to take out her anger in a new way, which is 10 times worse than anything she's done up until this point. She decides to tie Frank up and take his clothes off and webcam them while she reverse R-words herself. What the fuck? This whole situation with Karen and Frank is absolutely disgusting, and I really don't think the writers knew where to draw a line when it comes to pushing boundaries. I don't think that we really needed to include this. I think this is what ends up ruining Karen's character going forward. The finale of season 1 opens up with the Gallagher siblings at the police station waiting any new information on Ian and Lip post getting arrested for the stolen car. According to Tony, Lip could be charged as an adult because he is 17 years old. While being questioned, Lip takes full responsibility for the stolen car and says that Ian had absolutely no idea. A little bit later on, Fiona and the younger siblings are still waiting at the police station. Fiona calls Steve in a panic as she suspects the car came from him. However, Steve is still not answering because of the deal he made with Tony the episode prior. The next morning, the Gallaghers have returned home, and Fiona heads over next door to where Steve would presumably be, and nobody answers the door. So Fiona is convinced that he's gone. Meanwhile, at the Jackson house, Frank joins Karen in the bathroom while she's doing her business, and he tells her that they cannot continue on with their transgressions because it would be wrong to do that to Sheila. A little bit later on, Karen decides to send the video of herself and Frank not only to her father, but everyone else at his work as well, just to embarrass him. Tony is able to bargain with his commanding officer to get Lip and Ian released from jail. After the Gallaghers return home, Fiona interrogates Ian about the stolen car. Ian still swears that he doesn't know anything about it. As Fiona gets up to leave, Ian finally comes out to her.
I'm gay.
I know.
Meanwhile, Steve flags down Tony's car, and before Tony can attack Steve for not leaving town like he asked him to, Steve demands Tony get Ian and Lip out of jail. Not knowing that Tony has literally already done this, Steve begs and begs and begs, and eventually offers Tony his house. Meanwhile, Eddie arrives at work and opens his email to the video of Frank and Karen, which was sent to him obviously by Karen earlier in the episode. Obviously enraged, Eddie leaves work early and heads to the alibi to try and kill Frank, who is being hidden by Kevin. Kevin only finds out why he's hiding Frank when Eddie says,
"You fucked the wrong guy's daughter, Gallagher!"
You gone?
Yeah.
Anybody got a spare pair of shoes I could borrow?
Back at the Gallagher house, Debbie tries to tell Fiona about Steve's double life, but Fiona thinks Debbie's talking about the fact that Steve sells and steals and buys cars, and that's just not the case. She's trying to tell her about the fact that his name isn't Steve, it's Jimmy. Fiona tells Debbie she already knows everything, but Fiona doesn't know anything. Later that night, Steve actually shows his face around the Gallagher house to apologize to Fiona for being AWOL and asks Fiona to move to Costa Rica with him. Fiona does not want to leave her siblings, especially with the fact that Ian and Lip were just arrested, so that proves that in her mind, her siblings still need her. Steve tells her he's leaving tomorrow and she's welcome to come with him. For a moment, it looks like Fiona might want to go with him. By the time he leaves, she is still undecided about the whole situation. Eddie returns to work and sees his co-workers watching the video of Karen and Frank that they were all sent. This prompts him to drive out in the middle of a frozen lake and drill a hole in it before tying a cinder block to his legs and jumping in. Later on in the episode, Lip does find out about the video between Karen and Frank. Lip steals a car yet again, and this time uses it to try and run his own father over. Later that night, Karen realizes she's made a terrible mistake before returning to Lip to apologize to him for sleeping with Frank and the whole situation with her blowing up on him a few episodes ago. The two of them talk about their issues with both of their fathers and are seemingly back together, or are at least friends again. At the end of the night, Frank tries to apologize to Lip from outside his window, but Lip doesn't want to hear Frank out at all, and in response to Frank's apology, Lip does this.
How can I ever really say I'm sorry? Shit. What the fuck?
At the end of the episode, Fiona has decided to go with Steve to Costa Rica. She packs a bag and heads off for the train station and looks like she's about to get on the train until the train leaves without her. Steve, on the other hand, boards his flight without Fiona, and the two officially part ways. Fiona instead heads over to Jasmine's place of work to apply for a position there, and that is where season 1 of Shameless fades to black. So at the end of season 1, Frank has basically made a lot of horrible decisions. We've gotten to know this character through his awful decision-making skills, semi-bad luck, but most of it he brings on himself. Obviously, the whole thing with Monica was a big thing this season. You know, he called her up just expecting her to sign the paper so that he could get that settlement money, but that didn't end up working out for him. The whole Sheila thing, as soon as he saw that opportunity to go and move in with her, it really backfired on him when he saw what she was really into when it comes to the bedroom. Frank's luck is definitely not good, and that is literally the whole basis of the show, is the luck that all these characters have. It's like a two-sided coin, you know? It's like if you put a bunch of shit out in the world, you are gonna get shit. And that's what each of these characters struggles with from season 1 onward. Then there's the whole thing with Karen and Frank in the last 2 episodes. I mean, they planted some seeds early on that it was going to happen, like with Karen in the bathtub and Frank, you know, like watching her and giving her the towel. I really wish that they wouldn't have included this storyline in the show, because it really just paints Karen as the perv and not Frank, which is not a message that you want out in your television show. But yeah, this is everything Frank does in season 1 broken down by months. So this season for Fiona is really all about her choice between Steve and Tony for the most part. Obviously, she does choose Steve at the end of the day, and there are some few hints that she might be interested in Tony, but because Steve is just more of a bad guy, she's more inclined to stay with him and choose him because that's just who she's attracted to, because of what she saw growing up with Frank. Tony is a little bit too much of a good guy in her opinion, and obviously because he's a cop, you know, it's a little bit boring for her. And one thing about Fiona is she's always going to go for the more interesting choice. Steve just happens to be more interesting than Tony. At the end of the day, he does end up leaving. So even though Monica does come in and try to take over for Fiona for a few episodes, she does ultimately decide to leave, which is why at the end of the season, Fiona kind of is back where she started with the kids, still basically mothering them. Going back and rewatching season 1, I was honestly surprised at how little Lip's storyline really means this season. He has a lot more to do in season 2, but in the first season, he's really just with Karen. His main source of conflict is Karen. Like, nothing really else gets in the way of his wants and needs. It's really just Karen and their tumultuous relationship. Obviously, when he finds out that Karen literally slept with Frank, he goes a little bit ballistic on Frank. There is a lot of tension between him and Frank this season. All the kids really have a lot of tension with Frank, so it's nothing really special to just Lip. Yeah, season 2 is going to be a lot more of a bumpy ride for Lip and Karen because some stuff happens. Let's just put it like that. Ian's storyline in season 1 is a bit of a mixed bag. In season 1, Ian definitely has the most tension with his character, I would say. There's the whole him trying to keep the fact that he's gay from all the people around him. Obviously, Mandy is really interested in him in the first few episodes, and he has to kind of like shut her down. Then the Milkovich brothers come in and try to kill Ian. So Ian definitely has a lot of enemies in the first couple episodes of this season. He obviously also is literally dating and being statutorily R-worded by this guy, his literal boss, Cash, and Cash's wife, Linda, who does find out eventually that they are together. Again, his family also really does not know that he's gay besides Lip. He also finds out in this season that Frank is not his dad. His dad is literally his uncle, Clayton. It's another thing that makes Ian feel a lot different from his siblings. You know, like every other sibling has Frank in common besides him. And then there's the fact that he's gay, so Ian kind of just always has felt like an outcast. In season 1, Debbie doesn't really have a lot of storylines because she's still really young, but she does have an arc towards the end of the season where she's trying to expose Steve to Fiona because she knows about Steve's double life. And I'm just gonna say it right now, Debbie's the smartest character in this family, obviously besides Lip. Literally, she's the only one that figured it out. And by the end of the season, Fiona still doesn't really know. In season 1, Carl isn't really used that much at all, besides a couple of one-off jokes, so he doesn't really have any storylines. Season 1 was a ratings win for the show, so of course Showtime would renew the show for a second season. This time the cast had the luxury of filming during the summer months, which allows for a lot more exterior scenes throughout, marking a visual distinction between the first 2 seasons, which I really like. Season 2 sees all the main cast of last season return. We do get a few recasts this season. Mandy is recast, which I'll explain a little bit more later on. Steve is also temporarily out of the the picture, but don't worry, he does come back, which is a little bit of a spoiler, but it happens pretty early on. Overall, season 2 feels a lot more lively than season 1 did, which is also due to its summer setting. But don't worry, this season does have its fair share of drama, which I will get into. The season premiere opens up at the Jackson house. Frank and Karen are outside on a warm summer's day, watching Sheila hit 100 steps on the sidewalk near their house. Sheila has made quite a lot of progress on her step goals. Her goal is to eventually reach the alibi room where she can share a drink with Frank. However, Frank tells Karen that he's very scared of the people at the bar sharing stories about him to Sheila. We are also introduced to a new character named Jody in this scene. That is Jody. No, that is not Karen's sibling. That is Karen's new boyfriend. Jody is an interesting character. He kind of does nothing throughout the show, but is involved in pretty important storylines going forward. A lot of his appearances are used for comedic relief, purely based on Zach McGowan's comedic timing and occasional deadpan delivery. His character essentially revolves around being a mid-20s reformed sex addict who is dating a much younger Karen. I'm assuming Karen is 17 in the season because that's how old Lip is. Her 18th birthday could be anytime after September 2011 due to her being a senior this season, and as we know, the season starts in June and July of 2011. So Jody and Karen are technically in an illegal age gap relationship, and no one takes issue with it, especially Sheila, who oftentimes encourages it. Later on, Sheila will show lots of gratitude for Jody and how he's such a stand-up guy for Karen when he's literally dating a child. The amount of underage girls who get into relationships with adult men in this show is crazy. There's almost the same amount as in Pretty Little Liars. Frank goes to the alibi to drown his sorrow over the fact that Sheila is gonna be there very soon, and to his right is a man who claims to have been able to get up and walk right after being tased twice over. Frank does not believe this guy's story at all and bets $10,000 on him not being able to get up and walk after being tased by Kevin twice.
Again! Where's my 10 grand, mother?
So sure enough, Frank loses this bet and now owes this man $10,000. We catch up with our girl Fiona, who is working at a club with Veronica. Jasmine and her sugar daddy show up for their night out, and shortly after, Fiona's new man, named Adam, walks in as well. The next morning, Jasmine and her sugar daddy, along with Fiona and Adam, are on a double date of sorts, if you can call it that. Elsewhere, we catch up with Lip, Ian, and Mandy, who are at some kind of fight club where Lip is one of the participants.
Kick him back. Punch him like a bat.
So Mandy has been recast this season. In season 1, she was played by Jane Levy and is replaced this season by Emma Greenwell due to Jane wanting to pursue other roles. I feel like most people will remember Emma Greenwell in the role because she played her for a longer duration. I honestly forgot that Mandy was recast, not because Jane Levy did a bad job in the first season and needed to be recast, but because the differences in the character are honestly pretty subtle. However, there are a few differences. Jane Levy brings a sort of childlike playfulness to the very over-sexualized Mandy, whereas Emma Greenwell's performance kind of channels an Aubrey Plaza or Dakota Johnson performance. Mandy feels a lot less sexualized in season 2. Don't get me wrong, she's still portrayed as a sexual deviant at only 16 years old, mind you, but it's a lot less slut-shamey. I feel like the writers might have seen Jane Levy's exit as a way to amend that aspect of the character because, like I said, Mandy was quite literally a sophomore in season 1 who was constantly having to be portrayed in some sexual situation. After her date with Adam, Fiona returns home, and as she's about to walk inside, Tony is walking out of his new house that he extorted Steve out of in the last season. Things haven't really gotten any better between these two since Fiona chose Steve over Tony last season, and Tony has been unsuccessful in wooing Fiona since Steve has been gone. As Fiona runs upstairs for her early morning nap, Debbie welcomes in a house full of daycare kids. A little bit later on, Frank returns to the Gallagher house to take Liam in order to gain more sympathy while begging on the streets. And while begging on the streets, a car pulls up and takes both Frank and Liam. The car assumedly belongs to the guy that Frank made a deal with earlier on in the episode. We meet a new character this episode named Stan, who lives above the alibi room and just so happens to own the building. Stan is very old, and Kevin takes care of him while at work. Stan complains to Kevin about the electric bill being extremely high over the last month, which prompts Kevin to show Lip the reason why that is.
You know how I usually grow a couple plants, get us through the summer?
Holy sh!
Later on, they are airing out the plants in Kevin's apartment, and that is when Veronica walks in. And Veronica, by the way, had absolutely no idea the amount of product that Kevin was growing down in the basement of the alibi. The man that Frank owes money to lets him go, but keeps Liam as a bargaining chip for when Frank comes back with the money. Frank, who is essentially out of options at this point, heads over to a gay bar and starts prostituting himself. Meanwhile, at the cash and grab, Ian and Cash have basically broken up at this point. Cash has also begun to see someone else, and they are still doing it in the store. You'd think after all the trouble that they got into last season, Cash would know better. Later on that day, Lip finds out that Ian wants to get into West Point, and initially, Lip is kind of judgmental towards Ian about this whole situation and a little bit unsupportive at first, but after thinking it through, he does decide to help Ian with his grades and tutor him. At the end of the day, Debbie reports to Fiona that Frank never came back with Liam. All the Gallagher siblings march on over to Sheila's to confront Frank about this. They force Frank out of bed and demand he lead them to the man's house. Fiona marches into the man's house and completely empties her pockets, followed by the other siblings who do the exact same thing. Liam is let go and Fiona promises to bring the guy the rest of the money when she can. The next morning at the cash and grab, Cash essentially runs away with his new boyfriend and we literally never see him again.
Can you do me a favor, Ian? Can you give me a bit of a head start?
You're leaving?
Linda's got preeclampsia. I can't do it.
At the end of the episode, Kevin and Veronica ask Fiona and the rest of the Gallagher siblings to help them divvy up the rest of the product in the basement for a large bonfire. Fiona decides to take about $6,000 of that product to the guy Frank owes money to in order to settle the rest of his debt. The second episode opens up at the alibi room. A few people at the bar bring up an old friend of theirs named Dottie. Word gets out to Frank that she is awaiting a heart transplant, and this is when Frank smells an opportunity. As we know, Frank is a nasty person. He takes whatever he can and gives absolutely nothing back. The entire reason why Frank decides to go and try and stay with this woman named Dottie is because she has a very big pension waiting for her. The entire reason why Frank has decided to try and get in Dottie's house is because he thinks Sheila will kick him out once she learns of all the awful things he is capable of from his friends down at the bar. Think of it as like a preemptive strike on Frank's part. Elsewhere, Mickey is released from juvie to Ian and Mandy.
Here he comes. I smell like barbecue sauce.
I'm like, what?
Oh, what did I tell you?
Fiona comes home after a long shift and puts her tips in a secret bank of cash for emergencies called the Squirrel Fund, before heading upstairs for bed, only to realize that there is a pregnant woman who barely speaks English in her bed. Fiona learns that Frank rented her bedroom out to this woman. The next morning, Fiona arrives at work and meets Jasmine's friend, Richard. Jasmine wants to set Fiona up as Richard's sugar baby, but neither of them really seem that interested in each other when they sit down for a talk. At the start of the third episode, Lip meets with a colonel in the military in order to try and get Ian into West Point. He has to first get this colonel interested in him in order to then put in a good word for Ian. Elsewhere, Fiona goes on a date with an old fling of hers from high school named Craig Heisner, who is apparently married. This doesn't stop Fiona and him from being very flirtatious with each other. After leaving the date with Craig, Fiona finds an unclaimed purse while on the L train. She decides to take the purse for herself because no one is around to claim it. Later that day, she takes her entire family out to a buffet using the money in the purse. Meanwhile, at the Jackson residence, Jody asks Frank for his blessing in marrying Karen. Frank does give his blessing to Jody. However, when Jody isn't looking, Frank steals the engagement ring from Jody so he can propose to Dottie. Fiona decides that she made a colossal mistake in spending all the money from the purse, and she begins to feel extremely guilty about the whole situation, so she contacts the owner and shows up to return the purse, swearing to the woman that she didn't take the money that was inside. Frank returns to Dottie's house to propose to her. At first, Dottie is completely unimpressed and uninterested in marrying Frank, but seeing as she is at the end of her life, she decides to give it a shot. Later on that day, Dottie gets in the shower and takes off her ankle bracelet, which beeps when she's actually in the shower and not around to hear it. You want to know who is around to hear it though? Frank. He calls the number on the ankle bracelet and informs whoever's on the other end that Dottie is sadly passed.
There was a bus crash on Interstate 494. We've been informed there may be a heart available.
She doesn't need it anymore.
Fiona feels so much guilt about stealing this woman's money that she ends up going to the woman's house again to return a big portion of it. However, the woman, she presumes that Fiona did take the money, even though Fiona is still insistent on the fact that she didn't take the money. After the woman cusses Fiona out, Fiona decides to leave without giving the woman the money back. Feeling like she's in a particularly destructive mood, Fiona heads over and decides to finally have relations with Craig Heisner in his car. And to say that he's unimpressive in his efforts is a little bit of an understatement. Frank heads back to Dottie's house, and Dottie tells Frank that the heart that was meant for her went to someone else. Dottie feels as though she's at the end of her life and won't make it another 6 months for another heart to become available for her. She asks Frank to take her to the bedroom so that he can mercy kill her using sex. Frank agrees to this just as long as he can get a cut of her pension. In his sorrow, Frank returns to the alibi room and hands Jody his engagement ring back before Jody makes his grand proposal to Karen, and by grand proposal I just mean this.
Oh, Frank, the prayer worked.
Is that my ring? Yes.
At the end of the episode, Fiona calls Steve, yes, that Steve, who she hasn't heard from in months. At the beginning of the 4th episode, Debbie answers a knock at the door. The woman at the door claims to be a new mom for Debbie's daycare, so Fiona comes downstairs to give the new mom a rundown of the daycare situation. However, this woman is not one of the new moms. She is in fact Craig Heisner's wife, who has come to beat Fiona senseless.
Fiona. That's for fucking my husband!
Fiona runs over to Sheila's and hides under the kitchen table with Frank. I love it when the show gives us parallels between Frank and Fiona. Frank is usually on the run from someone, and here we see Fiona in a similar situation. The two have a very heartwarming moment with each other where they laugh and joke about how badly Fiona has fucked up. After returning home, Fiona notices a stress rash on Debbie's arm, no doubt due to the fact that she's had to take on so much responsibility while watching all these kids at the daycare. She decides that what Debbie needs is a party.
How about you invite some friends over and relax in the pool? They can come over, hang out in the pool, and then sleep over. It'll be like a birthday party, sleepover party.
My birthday is not until October.
Hey, it's somebody's birthday somewhere.
Lip takes Jody out to the alibi in order to get him drunk enough to spill some kind of dirt on him, all for Lip to plot his way back into Karen's life. When Lip finds out that Jody doesn't drink, he swipes Jody's wallet from his pocket and heads into the alibi bathroom. Shortly after, Karen walks in and demands the wallet. Feeling like his days are numbered at Sheila's house, Frank decides to try and make the world seem much scarier to Sheila so that she will cower in her house yet again.
So promise me you won't go to a market.
Well, Frank, you never told me which market.
Any of them. Ever.
His plan is to steal a really old gun from the alibi room. He then heads over to Mickey to get some kind of ammo for the gun. However, they don't make ammo for this type of gun anymore, so Frank just ends up taking a random bullet from Mickey, and this backfires on him, quite literally.
What the hell was that?
I'm sure it was just a car backfiring, sweetie.
Meanwhile, at Debbie's party, Popular Girl Holly Herkimer, Little Hank, Carl, Lip, and Mandy Milkovich all sit down for a movie night. Mandy and Lip ditch the party to go upstairs and have a little fun time of their own. Downstairs, Little Hank is trying to get with Holly, and Holly eventually goes upstairs to try and get with Lip. Due to the fact that Holly is much younger than Lip, Lip freaks out and everyone leaves the party early. The next day, Sheila is on her way to the alibi. This is the day that she is going to make it there when, out of nowhere, a plane leg falls out of the sky directly in front of her, and Frank's prayers are answered. At the end of the episode, Karen shows up at the Gallaghers' house and punches Lip around before telling him to stay away from her, Jody, and quote, this baby.
Oh, hey, stay the fuck away from me! Stay the fuck away from
on, Jody, and stay the fuck away from this baby!
At the beginning of the 5th episode, Eddie's body is found in Lake Michigan. Police ask around about Eddie's passing. They think it had something to do with Frank. Frank is eventually arrested and shown the video him and Karen made together. The detective leaves to talk to Sheila about it. Later on, the detective returns and basically lets Frank go. Frank returns to Sheila's, and Sheila says she forgives Frank for being taken advantage of. This situation is so fucked. I get that Sheila is supposed to feel like a ditz, but I don't know, I feel like Sheila would even know what's going on between Karen and Frank. Meanwhile, Fiona attends a wedding with Richard. A bit later on at the wedding, Fiona is confronted by one of Richard's old college friends, and he gets her to admit the fact that she never went to Princeton like Jasmine claimed Fiona did. Elsewhere, Lip finds out through Karen that her and Jody are already married, and they went down to a courthouse a few days prior to actually get married in private. While at home, Ian is visited by a colonel, and he learns that Lip was actually able to get into West Point himself. Later on, Ian confronts Lip about this because the West Point spot was supposed to be Ian's, and Lip never did enough to explain to the colonel that he was doing this to get him close to Ian and not himself, if that makes sense.
You can get back to your whore. You can't be sure if your kid is your son or your brother.
At the end of the episode, Fiona is reunited with Steve while he's walking down the steps of Tony's new house. With Steve's return, Fiona looks like she has seen an absolute ghost. What does this mean for Steve and Fiona going forward? Could his marriage get in the way of a possible future between the two? Most likely, yes. The 6th episode of this season reintroduces us to the character of Grammy from season 1, who had a small cameo in the 11th episode. Grammy is released from jail at the beginning of the episode and shows up to the Gallaghers' doorstep, and along with the help of Carl and Debbie, she retrieves a big stack of cash that was stored in the wall of the Gallaghers' bathroom. Peggy pays Debbie and Carl off to keep this whole situation a secret before telling them her plan to get revenge on the guy that ended up ratting her out to the feds about the exploded meth lab that got her arrested. Later that day, Peggy shows up at the bar and is reunited with her son, Frank. Frank looks like he's seen an absolute ghost when Peggy walks in.
Jesus, they let you out?
Yeah, they let me out.
What are you doing here?
I'm conducting the Chicago Symphony, Frankie. What do you think I'm doing? Buy your mother a drink and pretend like you're glad to see me.
The next day, Lip goes to the cash and grab to try and mend his relationship with Ian that was partially fractured in the last episode. However, Ian is ignoring Lip, like big time ignoring him.
How fucked up is that, huh? That's it. Nothing. Just gonna give me the chin.
Meanwhile, Peggy meets Sheila, and let's just say it doesn't go super well.
Marshmallow! My pony! Oh, he died. You know, all this cooking we're doing is for my daughter Karen's wedding reception tomorrow. Oh, here he is. Your ears must be burning. Christ in heaven. I thought I was gonna have to shoot myself. Are you sticking it in that? Bitch just took 10 years off my life. Let's get out of here before that nut job comes back. You're a very rude person. That's a new low, even for you, Frankie. I'd like you to leave.
Frank and Peggy use Kevin's car to drive down to the doctor's office to threaten Peggy's former meth lab partner by giving him 24 hours to give her the $200,000 that he owes her. After arriving at the park, Peggy begins to feel a bit dizzy, so she sends Frank off to grab her pills. However, Frank instead decides to head back to that doctor's office to extort $75,000 out of him. Peggy finds out that Frank was only able to get $50,000 out of the doctor. Due to the fact that she knows he's definitely hiding some for himself, she stabs him in the leg and demands to see the rest of the money. Fiona agrees to go on a double date with Steve. She decides to bring her old fling Adam with her, even though they haven't really been talking all that often lately. While at lunch, Fiona heads to the bathroom, followed by Steve, who joins her. After a quick transgression between the two, which Fiona shuts down, both of them return to the lunch, hot-headed and very sweaty. Adam ends up putting the pieces together and figuring out what was going on in the bathroom. He decides to walk out on the lunch and effectively dumps Fiona right there. The next day at Karen's wedding party, Sheila and Peggy get into a huge fight, which just does not end well.
She's made some wonderful, wonderful friends along the way. Like Lip. The gallaghers, ones in that house where the cops always came.
Jesus, is that bitch ever gonna shut up?
Frank's mother. We're just so honored that you're here. You weren't even invited.
Why don't you do yourself and everyone else a favor and shut up?
Have I offended you? In my home, where you're an interloper?
No one wants to hear it, you fucking windbag.
I'll let them work it out.
And I don't know how an angel like that man could have come out of your poisoned womb.
Shut up, you batty bitch!
Your coochie smells of brimstone and sulfur!
I will fuck you!
The following day, Ethel and one of Kevin's basketball kids leave together with their respective babies. At the end of the episode, Sheila reveals to Karen and Frank that Eddie left his entire pension to Karen, leaving Frank extraordinarily disappointed. At the start of the episode, Jasmine arrives at the Gallagher house to invite Fiona onto David's boat. Fiona initially turns down the offer, but eventually decides to go with as long as Kevin and Veronica can come with her. Shortly after their arrival on the boat, Fiona realizes that Steve and Estefania are also at this party. Fiona's obviously not ecstatic about the fact that she has to hang around her ex-boyfriend, who obviously ruined that double date a few days ago. Steve tries to make a move on Fiona, who is still upset at him for leaving her, rightfully so.
Vamos pra casa, por favor, eu bebi demais.
You should take her home. Night, Jimmy.
This scene where Fiona turns Jimmy down is really emotional. It's truly the first time since Steve came back that Fiona has broke down in front of him. She's trying to not let herself fall down a familiar rabbit hole with Steve, and ultimately just tells him to leave. Later on, Jasmine tries to comfort Fiona by kissing her, which isn't abnormal for Jasmine, but she also tells Fiona that she loves her, not in a friendship way, in a I love you kind of way. She's still very emotional about the whole Steve thing that just happened 30 seconds ago, and now Jasmine is trying to confess all her feelings to her, and Fiona is like, I need to go. Still in shambles over the Jimmy Steve situation, Fiona leaves post Jasmine giving her a kiss, because that just wasn't going to help her in that moment. I don't know what Jasmine was thinking. Back at the house, Karen makes Jody sign a prenuptial agreement, and later on she kicks him out because she decides she hates him completely out of nowhere. The next day, Carl blows up a meth lab that him and Peggy were starting up down in the basement.
You blow up our lab?
A little bit.
Oh, come here. We'll get it right next time.
Fiona confronts Frank about Peggy, and together they come up with a plan to rid themselves of her. However, upon returning home, they learn that Peggy was recently taken to the hospital and diagnosed with cancer, which seemingly solves their problems with Peggy because the doctors are not giving her very long to live. I think I forgot to mention this, but Lip has successfully gotten back with Karen now that Karen has completely tossed Jody to the side. Later on, we see Ian and Lip bury the hatchet.
I'm sick of living in your shadow. Who the fuck's asking you to? It's hard not to when all my clothes are hand-me-downs.
The next day, school starts for all the Gallaghers. Lip has declared to Fiona that he has officially dropped out of school and will not be returning for his senior year. This becomes a very hot topic of debate between Fiona and Lip, and they will spend, no joke, the rest of this season arguing about it. Lip is insistent about getting a job in order to provide for Karen, and his plan does not include him finishing high school, which is something that Fiona, again, like I said, is very upset about. At the end of the episode, Jasmine shows up to the Gallagher house, and
I got Estefania drunk so that you could have sex with Steve.
I didn't want to have sex with Steve.
Right.
I don't need you meddling in my life.
Meddling? When you need something from me, it's fine, but when I need something, suddenly little Miss Fiona just runs away.
Okay, you need to go.
Fine! I don't give a shit! You just kicked me out like David and Hal? You're all just a bunch of assholes!
At the beginning of the episode, Frank and Peggy are now living at Sheila's house due to Fiona kicking both of them out. Frank heads off to the store and leaves Peggy for Jody and Sheila to deal with. Meanwhile, at the cash and grab, Frank shows up and buys himself some supplies just after catching Ian and Mickey while they have sex in the cooler. Frank is so nonchalant after finding this out. Mickey is especially convinced, though, that Frank will rat him out for being gay. Meanwhile, Lip agrees to return to school if Fiona does as well, which leads her to find out that she can just get her GED instead. However, when Lip finds out she's essentially taking the easy way out, he says that the deal is off. Later that day, Kevin comes to talk some sense into Lip. It's a recurring theme for Lip's character to constantly go against the expectations placed upon him. Due to his upbringing and the people around him who have constantly put him on a pedestal, Lip oftentimes becomes overwhelmed by these expectations and tries running in the opposite direction.
It's not my problem.
I disagree. If you want to quit something, quit trying to make your life complicated. Go to school and enjoy being smarter than everyone and become master of the universe.
Now, what if I don't want to be master of the universe?
Tough! You gotta be one of those ridiculously rich, successful dudes and put my kid through college someday. But no pressure.
The next day, Lip attends class, and in the middle of this lecture, he just goes crazy and throws a chair through a window, which ends up getting him expelled.
You!
Another storyline this episode sees Jody and Sheila taking care of Peggy, and it is seriously some of the most entertaining television you will ever watch.
How do you do that? The nice thing. I was a shitty mother. Shitty. But what are you gonna do? Cry? No. I'm sorry I pointed that gun at you. I never should have said your hoochie smells like sulfur. I've always taken care of myself down there. Not easy the older you get. Well, don't I know it?
Peggy asks Jody to bring her to drop off the money she extorted from the doctor a few episodes ago to each of her sons, minus Frank, who stole some of her drugs the night prior. While Jody puts the envelopes of cash in the mail, Peggy wheels into the middle of the road and attempts suicide before Jody is able to make the rescue. After returning home, Peggy asks Sheila to mercy kill her because things for Peggy aren't going to get any better. Sheila does end up doing this. The show ultimately plays this for laughs, but it is quite sad in my opinion, especially because I really was starting to love these two together. Elsewhere, Mickey quits his job and attempts to kill Frank before getting himself arrested when he sees a cop. Fiona comes home and gives Lip an ultimatum about this whole school situation. She tells him to either return to school or pack his things and move out. And to Fiona's surprise, he does just that before slamming the door on his way out.
What are you doing?
Oh, I'm not going back to school, so I guess it means I'm leaving.
And at the end of the episode, Frank arrives at someone's doorstep in tears from his mother's passing, and when the door opens, Frank is greeted by none other than Monica. The 9th episode opens with Monica making breakfast for all the kids. Understandably, each one of them is very confused as to why she's there.
Army died. Debbie! Oh, Leo!
Still in the dryer?
Yeah. It's here.
Hell is she doing here?
Harvey.
Mom? In the Jackson house, Sheila is almost convinced that there is a ghost lurking around upstairs. Later on that night, Monica and Frank break into Sheila's house in order to steal the money that Peggy was hiding in the cushions. While this is all happening downstairs, Sheila thinks that she's a ghost hunter.
Is that you? I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm here to talk.
The next day, Lip moves in with Steve. We also get a scene here where Jody and Sheila are visited by a priest. They are aiming to open a hospice business in Sheila's house, and they want to know how to get rid of the spirit that is allegedly residing in the house. And that's when the priest says this.
Anything you need to repent.
No,
Relax.
Sheila.
Come on, my man. Go to the Lord.
Nothing comes to mind, but I'll pray on it.
Later on, Jody and Sheila have gotten quite close with each other. So close, in fact, that they do this. At Carl's football game, Lip arrives and sees that Monica has joined the party, and he is clearly upset at Fiona and blames her for letting Monica come back into the kids' lives while Lip was away.
Come on, sit with us.
What, I'm off the boat for 1 minute and there's a fucking mutiny?
Yeah, well, no one told you to get out of the boat.
Actually, you did.
Meanwhile, Karen comes home and realizes that Sheila and Jody are doing the dirty in Sheila's room. The next morning, Terry Milkovich comes storming into the Gallagher's house and attacks Ian, seemingly from out of nowhere, before revealing the fact that Mandy is indeed pregnant, and he believes Ian to be the father because Ian and Mandy are still technically together, even though they're not really together. Jamie tries to get with Fiona yet again at the beginning of the 10th episode when he shows up early in the morning at the Gallagher house. However, Fiona has absolutely no interest in getting with him. She tells him until he can make a decision between her and Estefania, she's not even going to consider being with him again. So the episode goes along and it feels like it's going to be a normal episode until Monica, from out of literally nowhere, finds the squirrel fund money. She runs up to Frank, who's in a grumpy mood, and basically shows him the money. Together they run off to go buy DRUGS and pretty quickly start arguing with each other while in a stolen car. Monica then decides to leave Frank in Indiana and return home. Meanwhile, Jimmy and Lip are trying to smuggle Estefania's lover from Brazil. However, the shipping container that houses him is lost. Monica's current manic episode has gotten so bad that she's blown the rest of the money from the squirrel fund on dolls for Debbie, who didn't have the heart to tell her that she's not into dolls anymore. Later on that day, Monica takes Ian to a military recruitment center in order to get him to enlist. However, they will not take him because he's literally not of age yet.
Gonna have to come and see me when you got your diploma.
What?
You're turning him down?
He needs to be a high school graduate.
Why?
The rules, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Fuck the rules. Sign him up.
After returning to the Gallagher house, Monica has decided to completely remodel the kitchen, and in walks Frank, who is still very upset about him being left in Indiana earlier that day. After a brief fight between the two, they make up and run upstairs together, which grosses Fiona out. The next morning, Lip and Ian break into the Milkovich house in an attempt to plant a gun on Terry. When Terry catches them and pulls a gun out of his own on them, Mandy shows up and reveals that the baby is, in fact, Terry's and not Ian's. Monica's disease has gotten so bad that she thought it was a good idea to take Carl out for his first driving lesson, and let's just say it did not end well.
Look, innocent. Good. Wait. You're supposed to be wearing a seatbelt.
So yeah, both of them are quickly arrested by the police. Later on, Lip is informed by a cop about Monica being in jail with Carl. He rushes out to get money from the squirrel fund in order to bail his brother and mother out of jail, and when he sees that the squirrel fund is missing, he confronts Frank about it, who has absolutely no idea what the fuck a squirrel fund even is.
The hell's a squirrel fund?
Empty your fucking pockets.
You talk to your father that way?
He eventually returns all the dolls that were bought for Debbie in order to get the money back to bail Carl and Monica out of jail. Later on, Fiona returns home and Lip goes off on her.
You're AWOL this whole time that you're giving orders?
I was around.
Really? So you know Monica spent all the squirrel fund money? The first rule you learn in this house? You hide the goddamn money.
She seemed better.
Look at this place. The sofa is in the kitchen. For fuck's sake, she tried to get Ian to enlist.
Thought it might be different this time.
Well, how'd that Kool-Aid taste going down?
Fiona is really put in her place here by Lip. This is when we see Fiona run upstairs and scold Monica profusely for getting Carl arrested and letting him drive a car.
Get out of bed! Get out of bed, Mom!
I find it so perfect that just as Fiona's trying to get her life together and she gets this nice job that's gonna make her a lot of money, Monica goes and pulls this shit, which just makes Fiona burst out with emotion. She should not have put her trust in Monica to become a reliable mother yet again. And this is a big learning curve for Fiona. She's definitely had the experience to know that she should not have trusted Monica, but she still kicks herself because she thought that Monica could be better. The aftermath of the last episode is felt in the form of Monica's crash, representing her first depressive episode showcased in the show. Up to this point, we've only seen Monica in a manic state, especially in this season. It was focused on quite a lot in the last 2 episodes. Debbie tries to bring Monica food in this scene, but Monica claims that she's not even hungry. Ian is the last of his siblings to accept Monica's current mental state, leading him to attempt to get Monica to go to the club with him like they did in the last episode. Frank ends up being the one to force Monica out of bed in order to get her to go to his brother Clayton's house so that she can seduce him into giving some of Peggy's money to Frank. Their attempt to take his money fails when he turns Monica down, which in turn makes Monica's self-image worse. Elsewhere, Jimmy has finally located Marco's shipping container before reuniting Estefania with Marco. Later on, Marco finds out that Jimmy and Estefania have been sleeping together and are in fact married, and when he finds this out, he makes Jimmy give him his identity before forcing him out of the hotel room. Meanwhile, Ian has met a much older man at the club whom he joins in his hotel room. This is totally seen as a normal situation with absolutely no problems whatsoever. Ian is also bare-ass naked in this scene, so you can imagine why it's so problematic. After coming home, Monica goes under the stairs and claims that she hates herself. This is ultimately so heartbreaking, and even Frank tries to up her spirits by singing to her, but nothing really seems to be working because she's unmedicated. Jimmy arrives at Fiona's and tells her that he kicked Lip out and ended things with Estefania. This prompts Fiona to kiss Steve for the first time since their whole thing on Jasmine's boat, as a thank you for finally throwing Lip out. She then lets him stay the night on the couch, and even invites him to Thanksgiving the next day. The next day at the Jackson house, Frank breaks in to try and steal some lithium from Sheila, who just so happens to have them in her drawer. Out of nowhere, Karen's water breaks, and everybody starts rushing around trying to get their hospital bags ready. This will be Sheila's first time out of the house since the whole airplane incident. Meanwhile, back at Thanksgiving lunch, Monica joins the rest of the family for the feast. Soon after joining them, she does go into the kitchen and attempt suicide, leaving all the kids absolutely traumatized. After taking Monica to the hospital, they get word about Karen giving birth, so they head upstairs to go witness it happen. Karen finally gives birth, and we find out that the baby is not Lips. The baby's father is in fact someone named Timmy Wong, who Karen was also sleeping with on the side. At the end of the episode, everyone heads home, and Sheila does end up taking the baby for herself, even though Karen doesn't want her to have it. At the beginning of the episode, Frank arrives to try and break Monica out of the psych ward. Meanwhile, Fiona, Jimmy, Kevin, and Veronica clean the kitchen up. Fiona starts breaking down in tears. She ultimately always blames herself whenever there is a catastrophic event that happens in the family. In this moment, her tears are partly for what she had to see in the kitchen, but are also due to how traumatized her younger siblings will likely be after this event. Jimmy tells Fiona he's going to stay with her that night to make sure that she's okay, and it seems like their relationship is on the up and up again. However, Debbie and Carl are way too traumatized to sleep, so they join Fiona and Jimmy in their bed, and then they share a good cry. Later on, Lip returns to the hospital to check on Karen, who is still asleep, and the following day, Karen tells Lip she wants nothing to do with the baby that she just gave birth to. Lip is honestly more upset about the child not being his than the fact that he won't be able to be with the child. Karen eventually returns home and tries to tell Sheila to turn the baby over to the police. However, the police really do not give a shit that Sheila is taking care of the kids, so they just let her have him. Karen is so unlikable in this season. From all points of view, she's still very clearly upset with her father, and the complicated nature surrounding her relationship and how she feels about him since passing clearly doesn't stop her from doing terrible things and acting out around people who love her. She's just a mean daughter to Sheila, and Jody is harmless minus the fact that he's an adult who obviously shouldn't have been in a relationship with her to begin with, but she just randomly on a whim decides to throw him out and go back to Lip, whom she was just doing the same thing to a few episodes prior. And now with this baby, she's refusing to let her own mother take care of it because she doesn't want to look at it. They completely ruined Karen's character, in my opinion, this season. Later on, Fiona confronts Lip, who is staying with Mandy at the moment, and she tells him that she passed her GED, so that means that he, in her mind, has to go back to school. He also says he's not coming back home to live with them. Elsewhere, Frank and Debbie try to break Monica and her new girlfriend Jill out of the sanitarium, but Monica and Jill end up stealing Frank and Debbie's car, leaving them stranded at the sanitarium. We will not see Monica after this for a while. Meanwhile, Steve introduces his whole family to the Gallaghers, and when his father walks in, it is revealed that it is the man that Ian was sleeping with just the episode prior, so Steve's father is secretly gay and is sleeping with a teenager. The next day, Lip has decided to return to school and ultimately later on in the episode decides to move back in with his family. Oh yeah, and I forgot to mention, Karen runs away from home once Sheila tells her she's choosing the baby over her. Lip does try to get her to stay, but he is unsuccessful in his efforts. So yeah, Lip returns home and everything is as it's supposed to be at the end of the season. Fiona and the other siblings kick Frank out of the house and he is left to rot outside in the backyard. Season 2 basically kind of reassures us a lot of things about Frank that we learned in season 1. You know, his ability to just scam his way into any household. We saw again with Dottie. Obviously in season 1, he was very intent on getting in with Sheila because his family had kicked him out. And this time he tried to get in with Dottie because Sheila was about to kick him out once she learned of all of the horrible things he's done with Karen and then also just from the people at the bar. Frank was very paranoid in the early part of this season, and that's why he tried to leave to go stay with Dottie. But then when the whole thing with Sheila happens, Frank rejoiced because he had housing security again. Frank also has some pretty awesome scenes in this season with his mom and with Monica as well. When Monica comes back into the picture, the whole Peggy storyline is really interesting, and I'm really glad they decided to include Peggy in this show because she instilled a lot of depth in Frank's character about how he just is a man that hates his mom, and that's how he goes about treating every other woman in his life. Season 2 was a rough season for Fiona. She spent the first half of it really in a bunch of different relationships all at once. Obviously there was that guy Adam that she was close to in the first part of the season. She got close to Richard, who was supposed to be like her sugar daddy for a few episodes. And then when Steve just comes in and marches all over her trying to get over him, she tries to push him out. Fiona also gets in a huge argument with Lip this season, and that puts a big strain on their relationship for a while, but she does end up bettering herself because of it. She goes back to school, gets her GED, which is going to be really good for her going forward to get a good job. And by the end of the season, Jimmy, Steve, whatever you want to call him, has fully marched back into her life, and she's not really asking him to go anymore. You know, she's still a little bit bitter about it, but she's letting him stay there. There's gonna be a little bit more turmoil in season 3 as far as those two characters go, Jimmy, Steve, and Fiona, so we will see what comes of that in season 3 for the girlies. So season 2 is quite the ride for Lip. He has a lot going on. Obviously, he is refusing to go to school by the midpoint of the season. In the early part, Karen really wants nothing to do with him anymore because of her new boyfriend Jody, whom she does end up marrying, and she reveals to Lip that she's pregnant and the baby is most likely his. So this changes Lip's entire attitude around school. You know, he for a long time has been a straight A student, but ever since Karen got pregnant, he's like, I need to provide for this baby, I need to get Karen back on my good side, so I'm gonna go get a job. And it does end up working. He doesn't go to school, he moves out of his family's house. There's a whole bunch of drama between him and Fiona, which I think I mentioned earlier. Obviously this season he's basically the most rebellious he's ever been in the show. When Karen gives birth to the baby, he finds out the baby's not his, and this obviously makes him kind of break up with Karen. Karen ends up leaving town. In season 2, Ian's whole situation is about him trying to get into West Point, and he gets into a big argument with Lip around the middle point of this season because Lip was able to get into West Point and Ian was not. They eventually do make up, and that's really the only storyline as far as season 2 goes with Ian. He is back with Mickey at some point in this season, then Mickey gets arrested halfway through the season, so their relationship is kind of always on and off. In season 2, there's not a whole ton of focus on Debbie. She does start a daycare this season, so there's that. She gets a stress rash, and this eventually leads to Fiona planning a party for Debbie even though it's not her birthday, and let's just say the party does not go as planned. In season 2, he has his first storyline, if you could even call it that. He has a very small friendship with this guy named Little Hank, and there's a few scenes that the two get together, but really, again, not a whole lot of drama, not a whole lot of storylines yet with Carl here in season 2. Season 3 is probably my least favorite season of the first 3, just because of the pacing feeling a bit off for me, and the timeline is all over the place. On the Gallagher's calendar in the first episode, it says that it's May 2012. Frank wakes up in Mexico in the first episode, and when he asks what day it is, someone tells him that it's almost Easter, which just doesn't make any sense if the Gallaghers calendar says it's May. Even the Catholic Easter is in early April. Season 3 sees all the cast from season 2 return as season regulars, minus Karen, who left in the season 2 finale. The show also upgrades Mickey, Mandy, and Jody to be main characters as well. So after Frank wakes up in Mexico, he asks around for today's date and learns that it is almost Easter. Frank then heads off for the border but is unable to cross because he is without a passport. Elsewhere, Lip and Ian steal a bunch of parts from the Institute of Technology, and Ian is able to get away, but Lip is arrested. Sheila and Jody's storyline this season is basically relegated to raising Jaime, and I will have to say this is Sheila's worst season. Most of the time she's just really tired looking, and I almost feel like her role this season is much more subdued. Like they almost forgot to write a storyline for her this season. It's really just centered on Jaime, which is a storyline in itself, but to me, it's really just not that interesting. Fiona confides to Veronica and Kevin that she's getting really bored of Jimmy, and honestly, Jimmy's really been getting on her nerves as of late. Despite everything being great between the two, Fiona finds it very hard to be around him, getting more and more annoyed with him each day. Speaking of Jimmy, he is supposed to be watching Liam while she's at work, and he is just randomly kidnapped by this guy in a black SUV who reveals himself to be Estefania's father. He has his driver take them to Estefania's house, where they arrive to find out that Marco is there. Nando is assumedly not a fan of Marco because 5 seconds after seeing him, he pulls out a gun and shoots Marco repeatedly. Meanwhile, at Lip's arraignment, Judge gives him 200 hours of community service. Elsewhere, Fiona works at a toxic waste company and here on this day is fired. The next day, Frank is introduced to a drug runner in Mexico who plans to use Frank to smuggle a lot of product. Meanwhile, Fiona goes to ask for her old job back at the club. Fiona offers her managerial services for one night. She decides to use her last paycheck from the waste company in order to bet on herself for this club managing position. Meanwhile, Lip and Ian take the parts that they stole from the Institute of Technology to build themselves a robot and take it to a bot fight. And finally, at the end of the episode, Frank is reunited with his family after successfully being smuggled into the United States. At the start of episode 2, Frank is looking for a room to claim now that he's back. Debbie offers to share her room with Frank, who goes right up to bed. Frank brings a bunch of his bar friends over to live with him at the Gallagher house. They're literally so disrespectful, okay? They literally ruin Debbie's room, start pissing everywhere. Frank, because he's so drunk, falls on Debbie's art project for one of her classes. This upsets Debbie so much that she grabs a pillowcase full of soap and starts beating the shit out of Frank with it. Frank decides to get revenge on his own children for kicking him out by calling DCFS on them. So we will see where that takes everybody in the next couple episodes. Fiona applies for a job at a local grocery store, and she is brought into the manager's office for an interview, and while she is being interviewed, she begins to realize that this is not a normal interview. This man is expecting something out of her in order for her to get the job. An aspect of this episode that I don't like is the Lip storyline throughout about him trying to take down a known PDF file who he also is attracted to. He also quite literally takes this mission so far that he sleeps with her on multiple occasions. This storyline is just so forced and unfunny in my opinion that it takes away from the episode as a whole. Frank sees a child with cancer on TV getting his wish granted, and Frank sees this as an opportunity. After spending a considerable amount of time with Jaime, he realizes that he can use him to get any of his wishes granted. When the organization sees through Frank's plots, he claims that Carl is the one that has cancer before returning with Carl, who has a freshly shaven head. They ultimately turn down any of Frank's demands before offering Carl a spot at a cancer camp instead of meeting some famous celebrity. I also forgot to mention the fact that Kevin's ex-wife has shown up in the last episode and basically started living with Kevin and Veronica. Veronica has essentially been pushed to the side now that Kevin's ex-wife has tried to get him to know his alleged son. Fiona gets so upset about the situation that she literally yells at Kevin in front of his ex-wife and his alleged kid. And at the end of the episode, it is revealed that this woman completely lied to everybody and that this kid is not Kevin's and it's not even hers either. It's her sister's kid.
Cheryl, would you just listen to me?
You could have had this and you want that? He's not yours, Kev. He isn't even mine. He's my sister's, you stupid piece of shit.
What did she say?
What the fuck, bitch? Get her, babe!
At the start of the episode, Mandy and Lip hear a voicemail from Mandy's long-lost sister named Molly, begging for Terry and the rest of the Milkovich family to take her in because her mother has recently passed away. This forces Lip and Mandy to bring Molly home with them. Meanwhile, Fiona finds out that her coworkers are performing sexual favors for their boss, Bobby, while on their lunch breaks. Fiona is excluded from taking these Bobby breaks because she is currently blackmailing him for trying to do the same thing while hiring her. Upon learning about this disgusting situation, Fiona tries to band together with her coworkers in order to take a stand against Bobby. However, most of them decide to continue to offer him favors in order to keep their jobs. By the end of the episode, it is revealed that Jimmy's parents are getting a divorce, and this directly affects Ned quite a bit. He rushes on over to the Gallagher house, completely drunk. He goes upstairs and tries to seek comfort in Ian, and he gets in Lip's bed instead. This is when all the Gallaghers find out about Ned and Ian being together, which is just a bit of a culture shock. Fiona is informed that there's going to be work done on the sewer line just outside their house. Fiona realizes that there is a possibility Ginger's dead body could be found by the maintenance men, so she tells Frank that it's his responsibility to dig up Aunt Ginger's body.
Who?
The dead relative whose social security checks you've been cashing. You buried her, you unbury her.
Elsewhere, Veronica visits her doctor yet again and finds out that she still cannot have kids, biologically speaking, and obviously she knows that this is going to upset Kevin quite a bit because he's been wanting kids for seasons at this point. The next day, Frank fails to find Ginger, but does decide to head down to the alibi in order to get volunteers to help dig up the body. Meanwhile, Lip has been downright rude to Mandy on several occasions. He tells her to go home to her own house for once, in response to her asking if she can help with the ice cream truck. Meanwhile, Fiona is teased at her job by her coworkers and blamed for smoking in the bathroom, even though it was someone else. Kevin and Veronica decide the only way for them to have kids is to hire a surrogate. The first person that comes to mind is Veronica's mother, Carol, who reluctantly agrees to do it. After hours of digging, Frank's efforts to find Ginger have basically amounted to nothing. Fiona returns home and sees that he still hasn't found the body. That's when Jimmy arrives and starts complaining about his gay dad yet again. He's been going on and on and on about this situation all episode.
Whenever you need me, I'm like there for you, but the one time I need you, you're like, screw off.
This yard smells like a sewer. I got 3 drunk assholes operating power tools behind me, and the bitches at work locked me in a bathroom today. Oh, and we might all be on the verge of going to prison.
This is a pivotal moment for Fiona and Jimmy. Fiona gets so frustrated by Jimmy's moaning and complaining about his father that she yells at him and basically tells him that there is more pressing issues to deal with. From my point of view, Fiona is completely in the right here. Yes, Jimmy has his own issues that he has to deal with, but for him to constantly dismiss what she's going through in favor of worrying about who his dad is sleeping with just comes off as really entitled. Elsewhere, Mickey and Ian rob Jimmy's mother because Ned put them up to it so that they could grab a specific item for him. He told them that they could also steal whatever else they wanted to. Jimmy's mom shoots Mickey right in the ass, so they drive right back to the Gallagher house. Ian calls Ned and asks him to perform surgery to get the bullet out of Mickey's butt. Fiona eventually does find the body of Aunt Ginger and puts her bones in a bag, and this is when she walks in to announce that she's found the body.
Ian, what the f***?
I can explain this.
Who the hell are you?
I'm Brittany Sturgis from Child Protective Services.
The 6th episode focuses entirely on the children being separated from Fiona. Ian and Lip are taken into a boys' home for criminals and societal rejects. Debbie is placed with a woman named Mama Kamala who hoards food and toilet paper from her children and makes them work for it in order to earn their food privileges and toilet paper privileges back. Carl and Liam are kept together and sent to 2 gay, very rich men. Meanwhile, Fiona quits her job after her boss refuses to let her have the day off so that she can look into getting her siblings back. Elsewhere, Frank is tasked with watching Jaime while Sheila is away. Frank decides to leave Jaime alone in favor of hitching a ride out of Chicago due to the possibility of Ginger's body being found. Oh yeah, Frank still doesn't know that Fiona found Ginger's body because he's been so absent and doesn't even know that his kids have been taken away yet. The following day, Fiona confronts Frank at the bar and forces him to help her get the kids back. Jimmy, Fiona, and Frank arrive at the group home to talk to Ian and Lip and see how they have been holding up the last few days. Later on in the episode, we see Ian sneak out of the group home in order to be with Mickey, and Mandy sneak into the group home in order to be with Lip. Kevin and Veronica have basically tried everything in their power to get Carol pregnant, just short of doing it manually, and this is when Veronica suggests that they do exactly that. After learning that he and Monica must both take parenting classes in order to attempt to get the kids back, Frank asks Sheila to dress up as Monica and attend them with him.
I pretty much like being a blonde. I feel like cotton candy.
Meanwhile, Ian and Mickey are caught having sex by Terry, who stops them in their tracks, first of all, and then calls over a Russian escort to deal with Mickey by forcing the gay out of him right in front of Ian. Later on, Fiona arrives at DCFS to talk to her caseworker about getting all the kids back under one roof, and this is when she asks who ratted them out to DCFS. The social worker lets Fiona hear the phone call from none other than Frank.
I have to go to the restroom. I'd appreciate it if you didn't click on this file while I'm gone.
I would like to report a negligent situation. 6 kids living in squalor, no parental supervision. When the father is there, he's drunk. He hits them. Not that they don't deserve it.
Episode 7 opens up with Fiona consulting with a lawyer about the possibility of her filing for full custody of her siblings. After begging the lawyer to take on the case pro bono, the lawyer does agree to take on the case for them, and Fiona is officially taking Frank to court. At Sheila's house, Jaime's grandmother and father show up and demand to spend some time with him because they literally didn't even know that he existed until now. Sheila struggles with the idea of having to share her grandson, whom she's been solely taking care of for the better part of a year. But eventually she comes around to the idea of letting them take him for a night or two. Fiona's plan to get the court on her side is to write up a fake will for Aunt Ginger and fake Aunt Ginger's death. In the will, it will state that she is the beneficiary of the house, making it almost impossible for Frank to get custody because if Fiona has a stable job and a house for the kids, she's most likely going to get custody of the kids. She asks Veronica to secure an already deceased body that they can dress up as Aunt Ginger. Meanwhile, Debbie runs away from her foster house and raids the Gallaghers' kitchen for food because Mama Kamala has literally not been feeding her. After Veronica, Lip, Ian, and Fiona stage the fake Aunt Ginger's dead body, Fiona calls 911 and claims that she was away for a few days and then came home and found the body like this. Oh yeah, we also see Karen return to Sheila in this episode, so Fiona and Frank both show up for court. The hearing is to determine whether or not Fiona will be able to become the legal guardian of the children. Fiona lays out all the reasons why she thinks Frank is a horrible father. The judge pulls Fiona aside and tells her he thinks he's going to award her partial guardianship instead of full custody because of her willingness to provide for the children. The judge breaks down the situation for Frank in the courtroom, and he agrees, ultimately deciding he doesn't want to be the one fully in charge of all the kids. This makes Fiona an official guardian for her siblings. Lip tries to file the fake will, however, the courthouse tells him that it's already been filed just hours prior by someone named Patrick Gallagher. Now, if you don't know who Patrick Gallagher is, that is the Gallagher's cousin. We will see what comes of that in the next episode, but basically he out-Gallaghered them. At Aunt Ginger's memorial, Patrick tells Fiona he's taking the house from her. There isn't much that we know about Cousin Patrick and the rest of his side of the family, but we get the impression that he was simply just one step ahead of Fiona and the rest of the Gallagher kids. The next day, it is the first day of school for all the Gallagher kids. All the while, Patrick takes a tour of the house while making note of the various remodels he's going to be doing once Fiona is kicked to the curb. Meanwhile, Frank has been sentenced to court-ordered AA meetings. He attends a meeting and immediately meets a man named Christopher. Christopher claims he's a raging alcoholic who needs a sponsor around him 24/7. When asked to be this man's sponsor, Frank initially declines the offer before realizing that this means he would be getting free housing at this man's house. Meanwhile, Fiona gets her job back at the toxic waste company. Steve starts his first day there as well, and after a particularly gross few hours, Steve leaves early and instead gets a job at a coffee shop. So the Gallaghers have this list of options when it comes to trying to keep the house. Option 1 is to try and convince them that Ginger had dementia when she signed Patrick's will, which is very unlikely because how do you prove that someone had dementia when they signed something, but not when they signed another thing. Option 2 is just to go along with it and try and get a new house. Option 3 is to try and convince Patrick to back down. And option 4 is quite literally to kill Patrick. They decide to go with a mix of option 3 and 4. Fiona tells Mandy to order a hit on Patrick using her brothers. However, this proves to be unsuccessful, seeing as Patrick and his wife have guns of their own, and they scare Mickey and his brothers off before they can do anything. The next day, Jimmy is reunited with an old classmate from school. Jimmy becomes a bit envious of this guy and his life. He begins to consider going back to school in order to help provide for Fiona and her family. Due to option 3 being unsuccessful the day before, Carl decides to skip to option 4. He puts rat poison all over his sandwich, and this sends him to the hospital. Elsewhere, Frank learns that Christopher isn't even an addict and was just pretending for some reason.
Our relationship is based on honesty, Christopher.
I tried to drink alcohol. I just don't like the taste.
Jesus Christ, you're not an alcoholic?
Forgive me.
Well, then why go to AA? Why have me as your sponsor?
Please, Frank. Everything is going so good with us.
Next day at the probate hearing, Patrick shows up and the house is awarded to Patrick because his will was filed first. Meanwhile, at Sheila's, Miss Wong accidentally lets it slip to Sheila that Karen orchestrated bringing the Wongs into Jaime's life in order to get Sheila alone so Karen would be able to have time with Sheila without Jaime in the picture.
Oh, Karen is right. This is not a good place for baby.
Karen? When did you talk to Karen?
And at the end of the episode, Debbie lies to the police about Patrick sexually assaulting her, and this gets Patrick arrested.
Jesus, what? 900, final offer.
500, no deposit. I need a 50-year lease, and I want that in writing.
Fiona starts a temporary position at a company called Worldwide Cup, which sells, you guessed it, cups. On her first day at the job, she's working as a call center receptionist. After her first couple of hours, Veronica and Kevin send her a link to a website featuring botched circumcisions. The two are arguing about whether or not they want to circumcise their kid, and they're asking Fiona's opinion about the whole situation. A lot of Fiona's coworkers see her looking at this website and report her to their boss, Mike. Fiona has a meeting with this guy, and he doesn't seem like that big of a stuck-up boss. He's actually very understanding about the whole situation when she explains it, and he tells her just to not take as many personal calls at her desk and not to go on websites that feature male genitalia anymore. This episode also focuses on Frank as he tries to get domestic partnership from the state with Christopher, who is a little ashamed about pretending to be gay. After failing to get domestic partnership, Frank goes on a rant while at a mayoral rally about gay rights, which goes absolutely viral. After his mother sees this video for some reason, Christopher is forced to throw Frank out, leaving him homeless yet again. We also learn in this episode that Mandy has been applying to colleges for Lip without Lip's knowledge or consent.
You plagiarized Nelson Mandela.
Oh?
The MIT application essay.
You think I should have wrote it myself?
I think you shouldn't have applied to colleges for me without asking me.
I did ask you. I asked you like 100 times to get the applications in, and you ignored me.
For a reason.
What reason? That you're an idiot? You have any idea how much stuff I had to steal and sell to pay those application fees? It was a huge pain in the ass, and I did it for you. You know, you might even want to say thank you.
Later that day, Mandy also reveals to Ian that Svetlana is pregnant and her and Mickey are going to be getting married soon. This shakes Ian to the core. Honestly, Ian just needs to move on from Mickey at this point. I am so tired of that relationship. I'm not even gonna lie to you. Also, Lip and Karen are now kind of back together on the side, which is confusing because he was literally just upset at her a few episodes ago. And Mandy basically has a gut feeling about this, so she steals Lip's phone and texts Karen from his phone to meet her at the park, which allows Mandy to hit Karen with her car, sending Karen to the hospital. Frank has a meeting with the gay rights activists that he met in the last episode, where he is promised money in exchange for being a sort of spearhead for their organization. Meanwhile, Jimmy asks Fiona about the idea of him going back to med school because that is one of his passions lately, is wanting to go back to med school. Fiona is okay with it, but she doesn't know that he's actually talking about the med school that he went to in Michigan and not just the one here in Chicago. Elsewhere, we learn that Karen is in a coma at the hospital, and Sheila and Jody demand to know more about her condition. They learn that there's a possibility that she may never wake up. Later on, Frank is found by a gay conversion therapy organization, and he is propositioned by them to work for them, like on the side of working with the gay rights activists. So Frank agrees to play both sides. We also get a scene here where Lip finds out through Sheila that Mandy hit Karen with her car. We also find out that Carol is finally pregnant, so her and Kevin can stop sleeping together constantly. Later on in the episode, Jody wakes Karen up after doing this. Oh, I also forgot to mention, at some point throughout the episode, Fiona joins a baseball team made up of her coworkers from Worldwide Cup. Jimmy arrives to pick her up from the game and suggests him moving without her to Michigan.
You knew you were gonna have to move back from the beginning.
What? No?
Please don't be the guy who lies. Please don't be that guy.
Probably, for sure, but yes.
I'm tired,
Fiona.
dude.
Fiona.
What?
I need a change. Debbie needs braces. I'm making espressos. You're selling cups. It's a year.
Stop saying it like a year is nothing. Like nothing can happen in a year. Like being away from each other for a year wouldn't matter. I gotta get up early in the morning. Selling cups.
In one of the last scenes, Frank is found out by the gay rights activists that he has been playing them and isn't actually gay at all. At the beginning of the episode, Fiona decides to hear Jimmy out about moving the entire family to Michigan. A little bit later on, she asks her new boss Mike if there is a Michigan office. Oddly enough, in the same conversation, he brings up a camping trip that the company is taking this weekend, and he invites her to come along as well. After her shift, she comes home and tells the kids that they might be moving to Michigan before hopping on Steve's phone to answer a call about him getting approved for a studio apartment. This obviously upsets Fiona because she didn't know that he was going by himself to Michigan. In fact, they did come to the conclusion together that they were going to be moving the entire family. The next day, Mandy tells Lip not to come to Mickey's wedding, effectively dumping him. Jimmy is taken by Nando because Estefania was recently taken by the INS. He throws his phone into the lake before boarding the ship, and we quite literally do not see him again next season, so say bye, Jimmy. This is Jimmy's official exit from the show, and while he might pop up later here and there, this is the official last episode he's credited as a main character. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I absolutely despise Jimmy as a character. He's a little bit more tolerable this season, but when he starts bringing up his whole thing with his dad constantly, and then him starting to talk about med school and lying to Fiona about getting an apartment, he reverts back to the worst piece of shit. And yeah, I'm glad he's gone. Meanwhile, Carl and Frank decide to rob Carl's ex-foster parents. While at the campsite, Fiona accidentally kisses her boss before shutting down any further advancements between the two. Lip goes to the hospital to visit with Karen. She has lost the ability to make new memories. At the end of the episode, Frank is arrested for stealing the stuff from Carl's ex-foster family. At the beginning of the episode, Frank is released after passing out in his cell.
You have liver damage, esophageal varices, immune system dysfunction. Frankly, it'd be faster to tell you what you don't have. You need to stop drinking.
Spare me the sermon.
Juan will take you to processing.
Processing?
You're being released.
What?
If we keep you here, we'd have to treat you.
Elsewhere, Lip finally graduates. He finally gets his diploma in the mail, and at this point, he doesn't really know what he wants to do with his life. Frank comes home and takes Lip ice skating when he learns of his son's graduation. While the two actually have fun with each other for once, Frank has to ruin the moment by throwing up blood all over the place, which sends him to the hospital. Meanwhile, Jody has decided to leave with Karen and Jaime for Sedona, and they quite literally never return. It is really sad to see Sheila say goodbye to three pivotal people in her life, and it leaves the audience wondering what her storyline might be next season, but don't worry, she definitely has a better storyline next season than she does this season. This episode also marks these three characters' last appearance in the show. And while I'm glad that Karen was semi-redeemed, I still feel like writing her off was definitely the right decision, seeing as Lip can only go up from here in terms of his education. It's definitely a good decision to let him kind of go on his own journey next season without any girl trouble, because the majority of season 3 was spent with him being in a love triangle with Karen and Mandy. I also think it was a really good decision for him to completely break up with Mandy, because at this point, those two are just way, way, way too toxic for each other. Meanwhile, Fiona receives an envelope of money from Nando's driver before he ensures her that Jimmy is in fact safe, but she won't ever see him again. At the hospital, Frank learns that he has cirrhosis of the liver. Shortly after, Fiona arrives to scold him and tries to convince him to get back on the wagon for his kids. Ian tells Mickey that he's done with him. He essentially breaks up with him before informing him that he's going to enlist in the army. In the closing moments of the episode, Carl shaves Frank's head to let in the sun rays, which echoes Frank shaving Carl's head at the beginning of the season. We then see a closing montage to the season. Ian leaves for basic training and officially exits the show for the first time. But don't worry, Ian will be back eventually. He's just not in the first few episodes of next season. Lip has gotten into MIT, so the audience makes the assumption that he will be going to college next season. Fiona is also given a permanent job at Worldwide Cup, and in the final scene, Fiona calls Jimmy.
It's Steve, leave some words.
Last message. I promise. Wherever you are. Bye.
And that is where the third season fades to black. So season 3 has quite a lot going on for Frank. He obviously wakes up in Mexico in the first part of the season, and he kind of has to work his way back into his family, who obviously do not trust him at all. They obviously learn that he ratted them out to DCFS. Frank is basically shunned yet again by the middle of the season from his family. Sheila again wants nothing to do with him because she's with Jody at the moment. Frank just kind of couch hops again. You know, he finds this guy Christopher and yet again tries to move in with a complete stranger, and somehow it actually works. For a few episodes, he literally lives in that guy's house until Frank becomes like a gay rights activist for some reason out of nowhere, and then again he gets dropped by the gay rights activists and the conversion therapy people as well. By the end of the season, Frank is not looking too good because he is told that he could die very soon. So we will see where that picks up in part 2 of this video. So season 3 was a bit of a mixed bag for Fiona. The first part of it, she was really in trouble with Steve. You know, they were not looking too good in the first early part of the season. Obviously, when the kids get taken away from Fiona, Steve is a little helpful, but he's all still wrapped up in his own shit with the whole Ian and Ned relationship affecting Steve so bad. So Fiona basically is just like, whatever, dude, like, I will do this myself. Fiona does end up getting the kids back and also becomes legal guardian of them. It's a big win for Fiona. She also, by the end of the season, gets an office job for herself. She's making big girl money now. We will see where that takes her in season 4. I will say there are a lot of detours next season, and we will see that in part 2 of this video. Lip's entire storyline is basically focused on him and Mandy and whether or not Lip wants to go to college. Mandy is very adamant in getting him into college because she wants him to get out of, quote, the hood, and Lip, he's really torn on going to college and staying in Chicago. Lip is kind of tired of everybody telling him what to do and where to be, and we definitely see this a lot in the next few seasons as well, but it's a lot more pronounced here because all of the people around him, his sister, his guidance counselor, his girlfriend, you know, other people that he knows are all telling him, listen, you are really smart and gifted. You have a real opportunity here to get out of this shithole. He really doesn't want any of it. We will see where that takes him next season. Obviously, at the end of this season, he does graduate. He gets into college as well. So we will see what that brings to him in the 4th season. In the 3rd season, we basically start off with Ian with all of his siblings finding out that he's gay and that he's literally sleeping with Jimmy's dad, Ned. And after Ian has been separated from all of his siblings, he seeks comfort in Mickey, and they are eventually found out by Mickey's very homophobic father, Terry, and that becomes a big issue this season. Mickey obviously decides to stay with Svetlana. At the end of the season, he does end up enlisting in the army using Lip's identity, so we will see where that takes him in the 4th season. Definitely here in season 3, Debbie definitely comes into her own with the whole Frank thing. She stands up for herself, basically gives him what he deserves, a big beating. By the end of the season, she's starting to act a little bit more of a teenager, and Fiona is just getting used to that. There is a big shift in season 4 with Debbie, a big one, and we'll get into that. Season 3 is the first season where Carl gets his first proper storyline. He basically believes that he has cancer because Frank does tell him that he has cancer so that Frank can get some kind of handout. It's a whole thing, but he goes through this season really thinking that he does have cancer. And at the end of the season, when it's revealed that Frank is basically on his deathbed and that he's going to die very soon, Carl is like the only sibling that still cares about Frank. He's the only one that wants to go check up on Frank because this season him and Frank have spent such a large amount of time together. They do go and rob Carl's ex-foster parents at some point in the season, so we will see where Carl's loyalty to his father takes him in season 4. Let's just say that the relationship becomes a lot more focused on in season 4. And that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Please give it a thumbs up and share it around. It'll really do wonders for me in the algorithm. I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!